Yiddish Tales translated by Helena Frank. Colfed in Philadelphia, The Jewish Publication Society of America, 1912. Copyright, 1912, by the Jewish Publication Society of America. Preface. This little volume is intended to be both companion and a complement to Stories and Pictures, by I.L. Perez, published by the Jewish Publication Society of America, in 1906. Its object was twofold: to introduce the non-Yiddish reading public to some of the many other Yiddish writers active in Russian Jewry, and to leave it with a more cheerful impression of Yiddish literature than it receives from Perez alone. Yes, and we have collected, largely from magazines and papers and unbound booklets, 48 tales by 20 different authors. This, thanks to such kind helpers as Mr. F. Hieger, of London, without whose aid we should never have been able to collect the originals of these stories, Mr. Morris Meyer, of London, who most kindly gave me the magazines, etc., in which some of them were contained, and Mr. Israel J. Zevin, of New York, that able editor and delightful feuilletonist, to whose critical knowledge of Yiddish letters we owe so much. Some of these writers, Perez, for example, and Shola Malcolm, are familiar by name to many of us already, while the reputation of others rests, in circles enthusiastic but tragically small, on what they have written in Hebrew. One, such a Berdichsky, Jehiel, Frisman, Bershadsky, and the silver pen Judah Steinberg. On these last two be peace in the Olam Hoemus. The Olam HaSheker had nothing for them but struggle and suffering and an early grave. 1. Bershadsky's Forlorn and Forsaken, Frisman's Three Huet, and Steinberg's A Livelihood and at the Matzes, though here translated from the Yiddish versions, were probably written in Hebrew originally. In the case of the former two, it would seem that the Yiddish version was made by the authors themselves, and the same may be true of Steinberg's tales, too. The tales given here are by no means all equal in literary merit, but they have each its special note, its special echo from that strangely fascinating world so often quoted, so little understood, we say it against ourselves, the Russian ghetto, a world in the passing, but whose more precious elements, shining, for all who care to see them, through every page of these unpretending tales, and mixed with less and less of what has made their misfortune, will surely live on, free, on the one hand, to blend with all and everything akin to them, and free, on the other, to develop along their own lines, and this year here, next year in Jerusalem. The American sketches by Zevin and S. Lieben differ from the others only in their scene of action. Learners were drawn from the life in a little town in Bessarabia, the others are mostly Polish. And the folk tale, which is taken from Joshua Meyer's Archer's collection, published in Wilna in 1905, with the title Messieurs van der Beben, Odenis and Knifeflows, might have sprung from almost any ghetto of the Old World. We sincerely regret that nothing from the pen of the beloved grandfather of Yiddish storytellers in print, Abramowitsch, Mendel Mussasiferim, was found quite suitable for insertion here, his writings being chiefly much longer than the type selected for this book. Neither have we come across anything appropriate to our purpose by another old favourite, J. Denesson. We were, however, able to insert 3 tales by the veteran author Mordecai Spector, whose simple style and familiar figures go straight to the people's heart. With regard to the second half of our object, greater cheerfulness, this collection is an utter failure. It has variety, on account of the many different authors, and the originals have wit and humour in plenty, for wit and humour and an almost passionate playfulness are in the very soul of the language, but it is not cheerful, and we wonder now how we ever thought it could be so, if the collective picture given of Jewish life were, despite its fictitious material, to be anything like a true one. The drollest of the tales, Gymnasii, we refer to the originals, is perhaps the saddest, anyhow in point of actuality, seeing that the Russian government is planning to make education impossible of attainment by more and more of the Jewish youth, children given into its keeping as surely as any others, and for the crushing of whose lives it will have to answer. Well, we have done our best. Among these tales are favourites of ours which we have not so much as mentioned by name, thus leaving the gentle reader at liberty to make his own. H. F. London, March, 1911. Acknowledgement. The Jewish Publication Society of America desires to acknowledge the valuable art which Mr. A. S. Fidus, of the Department of Jewish Literature, in the New York Public Library, extended to it in compiling the biographical data relating to the authors whose stories appear in English garb in the present volume. Some of the authors that are living in America courteously furnished the Society with the data referring to their own biographies. The following sources have been consulted for the biographies: the Jewish Encyclopedia, Wiener, History of Yiddish Literature in the 19th Century, Pinne, Histoire de la Literature Judeo-Allemand, and the Yiddish version of the same, Digestschicht van der Jüdische Literatur, Balmahashabot, Gekleibin Schriften, Sefer Zikaron le Sophia Yisrael ha-Heir Matanukyom, Eisenstadt, Hakm Yisrael be America, the memoirs preceding the collected works of some of the authors, and scattered articles in European and American Yiddish periodicals. Contents. Preface 5. Acknowledgement 8. Reuben Asher Braubes. The Misfortune 13. Jehael, Judah Lobluwin. Earth of Palestine 29. Isaac Lob Perez. A Woman's Wrath 55. The Treasure 62. It is well 67. Whence a Proverb 73. Mordecai Spectre. An Original Strike 83. A Gloomy Wedding 91. Poverty 107. Shola Malachim, Shalom Rabinovitz. The Clock 115. Fishel the Teacher 125. An Easy Fast 143. The Passover Guest 153. Gymnasii 162. Elza David Rosenthal. Sabbath 183. Yom Kippur 189. Isaiah Lerner. Bertzi Wasafura 211. Ezrielk the Scribe 219. Yitzchok Yossel Brochba 236. Judah Steinberg. A Livelihood 251. At the Mats is 259. David Frisman. 3 Huet 269. Micah Joseph Berdichsky. Military Service 281. Isaiah Bershadsky. Forlorn and Forsaken 295. Tashrak, Israel Joseph Zevin. The Hole in a Bay Igel 309. As the Years Roll on 312. David Pinsky. Reb Shlomo 319. S. Leibin, Israel Hubwitz. A Picnic 357. Manasseh 366. Yours It for Mother 371. Slack Times They Sleep 377. Abraham Raisin. Shut In 385. The Charitable Loan 389. The Two Brothers 397. Lost His Voice 405. Late 415. The Kaddish 421. Avroham the Orchard Keeper 427. Hirsch David Normberg. The Raff and the Raff's Son 435. Meyer Blinken. Women 449. Lob Shapiro. If It Was a Dream 481. Shalom Musk. A Simple Story 493. A Jewish Child 506. A Scholar's Mother 514. The Sinner 529. Isaac Dobb Berkowitz. Country Folk 543. The Last of Them 566. A Folk Tale. The Clever Rabbi 581. Glossary and Notes 589. Reuben Asher Broyuds. Born, 1851, in Wilna, Lithuania, White Russia, went to Romania after the anti-Jewish riots of 1882, and published a Yiddish weekly, Yehudit, in the interest of Zionism. Expelled from Romania, published a Hebrew weekly, Haziman, in Krakow, in 1891, then co-editor of the Yiddish edition of Die Welt, the official organ of Zionism, Hebrew critic, publicist, and novelist, contributed to Ha Lebanon, at 18, Ha Sheha, Ha Boker, and other periodicals, chief work, the novel Religion and Life. The Misfortune, or How the Raff of Pumpian Tried to Solve a Social Problem. Pumpian is a little town in Lithuania, a Jewish town. It lies far away from the highway, among villages reached by the Polish road. The inhabitants of Pumpian are poor people, who get a scanty living from the peasants that come into the town to make purchases, or else the Jews go out to them with great bundles on their shoulders and sell them every sort of small way, in return for a little corn, or potatoes, etc. Strangers, passing through, are seldom seen there, and if by any chance a strange person arrives, it is a great wonder and rarity. People peep at him through all the little windows, elderly men venture out to bid him welcome, while boys and youths hang about in the street and stare at him. The women and girls blush and glance at him sideways, and he is the one subject of conversation. Who can that be? People don't just set off and come like that, there must be something behind it. And in the house of study, between afternoon and evening prayer, they gather closely round the elder men, who have been to greet the stranger, to find out who and what the latter may be. 50 or 60 years ago, when what I am about to tell you happened, communication between Pumpian and the rest of the world was very restricted indeed. There were as yet no railways, there was no telegraph, the postal service was slow and intermittent. People came and went less often, a journey was a great undertaking, and there were not many outsiders to be found even in the larger towns. Every town was a town to itself, apart, and Pumpian constituted a little world of its own, which had nothing to do with the world at large, and lived its own life. Neither were there so many newspapers then, anywhere, to muddle people's heads every day of the week, stirring up questions, so that people should have something to talk about, and the Jews had no papers of their own at all, and only heard news and what was going on in the world in the house of study or, lehavdil, in the bath house. And what sort of news was it then? What sort could it be? World-stirring questions hardly existed, certainly Pumpian was ignorant of them. Politics, economics, statistics, capital, social problems, all these words, now on the lips of every boy and girl, were then all but unknown even in the great world, let alone among us Jews, and let alone to Reb Nashumtzi, the Pumpian Raff. And yet Reb Nashumtzi had a certain amount of worldly wisdom of his own. Reb Nashumtzi was a native of Pumpian, and had inherited his position from his father. He had been an only son, made much of by his parents, hence the pet name Nashumtzi clinging to him even in his old age, and never let out of their sight. When he had grown up, they connected him by marriage with the tenant of an estate not far from the town, but his father would not hear of his going there off coast, as the custom is. I cannot be parted from my Nashumtzi even for a minute, explained the old Raff. I cannot bear him out of my sight. Besides, we studied together. And, in point of fact, they did study together day and night. It was evident that the Raff was determined his Nashumtzi should become Raff in Pumpian after his death, and so he became. He had been Raff some years in the little town, receiving the same 5 Polish gulden a week salary as his father, on whom be peace, and he sat and studied and thought. He had nothing much to do in the way of exercising authority. The town was very quiet, the people orderly, there were no quarrels, and it was seldom that parties went to law with one another before the Raff. Still less often was there a ritual question to settle. The folk were poor, there was no meat cooked in a Jewish house from one Friday to another, when one must have a bit of meat in honor of Sabbath. Fish was a rarity, and in summer-time people often had a milky Sabbath, as well as a milky week. How should there be questions? So he sat and studied and thought, and he was very fond indeed of thinking about the world. It is true that he sat all day in his room, that he had never in all his life been so much as 4 ells outside the town, that it had never so much as occurred to him to drive about a little in any direction, for, after all, whither should he drive? And why drive on with air? And yet he knew the world, like any other learned man, a disciple of the wise. Everything is in the Torah, and out of the Torah, out of the Jewry, and out of all the other sacred books, Reb Nashumtzi had learned to know the world also. He knew that Reuben's ox gores Simeon's cow, that a spark from a smith's hammer can burn a wagon load of hay, that Reb Elzeben Sharsam had 1,000 towns on land and 1,000 ships on the sea. Ha, that was a fortune. He must have been nearly as rich as Rothschild. They knew about Rothschild even in Pumpian. Yes, he was a rich Dano and no mistake. He reflected, and was straightway sunk in the consideration of the subject of rich and poor. He knew from the holy books that to be rich is a pure misfortune. King Solomon, who was certainly a great sage, prayed to God, Rishwasha al-Titnli, give me neither poverty nor riches. He said that riches are stored to the hurt of their owner, and in the Holy Jewry is a passage which says, poverty becomes a Jew as scarlet reins become a white horse, and once a sage had been in heaven for a short time and had come back again, and he said that he had seen poor people there occupying the principal seats in the Garden of Eden, and the rich pushed right away, back into a corner by the door. And as for the books of exhortation, there are things written that make you shudder in every limb. The punishments meted out to the rich by God in that world, the world of truth, are no joke. For what bit of merit they have, God rewards them in this poor world, the world of vanity, while yonder, in the world of truth, they arrive stripped and naked, without so much as a taste of kingdom come. Consequently, the question is, thought Reb Nashumtzi, why should they, the rich, want to keep this misfortune? Of what use is this misfortune to them? Who so mad as to take such a piece of misfortune into his house and keep it there? How can anyone take the world to come in both hands and lose it for the sake of such vanities? He thought and thought, and thought it over again. What is a poor creature to do when God sends him the misfortune of riches? He would certainly wish to get rid of them, only who would take his misfortune to please him? Who would free another from a curse and take it upon himself? But, after all, the evil spirit muttered inside him. What a fool you are, thought Reb Nashumtzi again. If, and he described a half-circle downward in the air with his thumb, if troubles come to us, such as an illness, may the merciful protect us, or some other misfortune of the kind, it is expressly stated in the sacred writings that it is an expiation for sin, a torment sent into the world, so that we may be purified by it, and made fit to go straight to paradise. And because it is God who afflicts men with these things, we cannot give them away to anyone else, but have to bear with them. Now, such a misfortune as being rich, which is also a visitation of God, must certainly be borne with like the rest. And, besides, he reflected further, the fool who would take the misfortune to himself doesn't exist. What healthy man in his senses would get into a sick bed? He began to feel very sorry for Elzeben Sharsam with his 1,000 towns and his 1,000 ships. To think that such a saint, such a Dano, one of the authors of the Holy Mishnah, should incur such a severe punishment. But he stood the trial. Despite this great misfortune, he remained a saint and a Tano to the end, and the Holy Jewry says particularly that he thereby put to shame all the rich people, who go straight to Gehenna. Thus Reb Nashumtzi, the Pumpian Rav, sat over the Talmud and reflected continually on the problem of great riches. He knew the world through the Holy Scriptures, and was persuaded that riches were a terrible misfortune, which had to be borne, because no one would consent to taking it from another, and bearing it for him. Again many years passed, and Reb Nashumtzi gradually came to see that poverty also is a misfortune, and out of his own experience. His Sabbath cloak began to look threadbare, the weekday one was already patched on every side, he had 6 little children living, 1 or 2 of the girls were grown up, and it was time to think of settling them, and they hadn't a frock fit to put on. The 5 Polish gulden a week salary was not enough to keep them in bread, and the wife, poor thing, wept the whole day through. Well, there, quick, it isn't for myself, but the poor children are naked and barefoot. At last they were even short of bread. Nashumtzi, why don't you speak? Exclaimed his wife with tears in her eyes. Nashumtzi, can't you hear me? I tell you, we're starving. The children are skin and bone, they haven't a shirt to their back, they can hardly keep body and soul together. Think of a way out of it, invent something to help us. And Reb Nashumtzi sat and considered. He was considering the other misfortune, poverty. It is equally a misfortune to be really very poor. And this also he found stated in the Holy Scriptures. It was King Solomon, the famous sage, who prayed as well, Rishwasha al Titnli, that is, give me neither poverty nor riches. Aha! Poverty is no advantage, either, and what does the Holy Jewry say but poverty diverts a man from the way of God? In fact, there is a second misfortune in the world, and one he knows very well, one with which he has a practical, working acquaintance, he and his wife and his children. And Reb Nashum pursued his train of thought. So there are 2 contrary misfortunes in the world, this way it's bad, and that way it's bitter. Is there really no remedy? Can no one suggest any help? And Reb Nashumtzi began to pace the room up and down, lost in thought, bending his whole mind to the subject. A whole flight of Bible texts went through his head, a quantity of quotations from the Jewry, hundreds of stories and anecdotes from the Fountain of Jacob, the Midrash, and other books, telling of rich and poor, fortunate and unfortunate people, till his head went round with them all as he thought. Suddenly he stood still in the middle of the room, and began talking to himself. Aha! Perhaps I've discovered a plan after all. And a good plan, too, upon my word it is. Once more, it is quite certain that there will always be more poor than rich, lots more. Well, and it's quite certain that every rich man would like to be rid of his misfortune, only that there is no one willing to take it from him, no one, not any one, of course not. Nobody would be so mad. But we have to find out a way by which lots and lots of people should rid him of his misfortune little by little. What do you say to that? Once more, that means that we must take his unfortunate riches and divide them among a quantity of poor. That will be a good thing for both parties. He will be easily rid of his great misfortune, and they would be helped, too, and the petition of King Solomon would be established, when he said, give me neither poverty nor riches. It would come true of them all, there would be no riches and no poverty. Huh? What do you think of it? Isn't it really and truly an excellent idea? Reb Nashumtzi was quite astonished himself at the plan he had invented. Cold perspiration ran down his face, his eyes shone brighter, a happy smile played on his lips. That's the thing to do, he explained aloud, sat down by the table, blew his nose, wiped his face, and felt very glad. There is only one difficulty about it, occurred to him, when he had quieted down a little from his excitement, one thing that doesn't fit in. It says particularly in the Torah that there will always be poor people among the Jews, the poor shall not cease out of the land. There must always be poor, and this would make an end of them altogether. Besides, the precept concerning charity would, heaven forbid, be annulled, the precept which God, blessed is He, wrote in the Torah, and which the Holy Jewry and all the other holy books make so much of. What is to become of the whole treatise on charity in the Shulchan Aruch? How can we continue to fulfill it? But a good head is never at a loss. Reb Nashumtzi soon found a way out of the difficulty. Never mind. And he wrinkled his forehead, and pondered on. There is no fear. who said that even the whole of the money in the possession of a few unfortunate rich men will be enough to go round, that there will be just enough to help all the Jewish poor? No fear, there will be enough poor left for the exercise of charity. Hieger, there is another thing, to whom shall be given and to whom not? Ha, that's a detail, too. Of course, one would begin with the learned and the poor scholars and sages, who have to live on the Torah and on divine service. The people can just be left to go on as it is. No fear, but it will be all right. At last the plan was ready. Reb Nashumtzi thought it over once more, very carefully, found it complete from every point of view, and gave himself up to a feeling of satisfaction and delight. Vera, he called to his wife, Vera, don't cry. Please God, it will be all right, quite all right. I've thought out a plan. A little patience, and it will all come right. Whatever? What sort of plan? There, wait and see and hold your tongue. No woman's brain could take it in. You leave it to me, it will be all right. And Reb Nashumtzi reflected further. Yes, the plan is a good one. Only, how is it to be carried out? With whom am I to begin? And he thought of all the householders in Pumpian, but there was not one single unfortunate man among them. That is, not one of them had money, a real lot of money. There was nobody with whom to discuss his invention to any purpose. If so, I shall have to drive to one of the large towns. And one Sabbath the beadle gave out in the house of study that the Rav begged them all to be present that evening at a convocation. At the said convocation the Rav unfolded his whole plan to the people, and placed before them the happiness that would result for the whole world, if it were to be realized. But first of all he must journey to a large town, in which there were a great many unfortunate rich people, preferably Wilna, and he demanded of his flock that they should furnish him with the necessary means for getting there. The audience did not take long to reflect. They agreed to the Rav's proposal, collected a few rubles, for who would not give their last farthing for such an important object? And on Sunday morning early they hired him a peasant's cart and horse, and the Rav drove away to Wilna. The Rav passed the drive marshalling his arguments, settling on what he should say, and how he should explain himself, and he was delighted to see how, the more deeply he pondered his plan, the more he thought it out, the more efficient and appropriate it appeared, and the clearer he saw what happiness it would bestow on men all the world over. The small cart arrived at Wilna. "Whither are we to drive?" asked the peasant. "Whither? To a Jew," answered the Rav. "For where is the Jew who will not give me a night's lodging? And I, with my cart and horse?" The Rav sat perplexed, but a Jew passing by heard the conversation, and explained to him that Wilna is not Pumpian, and that they would have to drive to a post house, or an inn. "Be it so," said the Rav, and the Jew gave him the address of a place to which they should drive. Wilna. It is certainly not the same thing as Pumpian. Now, for the first time in his life, the Rav saw whole streets of tall houses, of 2 and 3 stories, all as it were under one roof, and how fine they are, thought he, with their decorated exteriors. "Oi, there live the unfortunate people," said Reb Nashumtzi to himself. "I never saw anything like them before. How can they bear such a misfortune? I shall come to them as an angel of deliverance." He had made up his mind to go to the principal Jewish citizen in Wilna, only he must be a good scholar, so as to understand what Reb Nashumtzi had to say to him. They advised him to go to the president of the congregation. Every street along which he passed astonished him separately, the houses, the pavements, the droshkis and carriages, and especially the people, so beautifully got up with gold watch chains and rings. He was quite bewildered, so that he was afraid he might lose his senses, and forget all his arguments and his reasonings. At last he arrived at the president's house. He lives on the 1st floor. Another surprise. Reb Nashumtzi was amused to stairs. There was no storied house in all Pumpian. But when you must, you must. One way and another he managed to arrive at the first floor landing, where he opened the door, and said, all in one breath, "I am the Pumpkin Raff, and have something to say to the president." The president, a handsome old man, very busy just then with some merchants who had come on business, stood up, greeted him politely, and opening the door of the reception room said to him, "Please, Rabbi, come in here and wait a little. I shall soon have finished, and then I will come to you here." Expensive furniture, large mirrors, pictures, softly upholstered chairs, tables, cupboards with shelves full of great silver candlesticks, cups, knives and forks, a beautiful lamp, and many other small objects, all of solid silver, wardrobes with carving in different designs, then, painted walls, a great silver chandelier decorated with cut glass, fascinating to behold. Reb Nashumtzi actually had tears in his eyes, to think of anyone's being so unfortunate, and to have to bear it. "What can I do for you, Pumpkin Raff?" inquired the president. And Reb Nashumtzi, overcome by amazement and enthusiasm, nearly shouted, "You are so unfortunate." The president stared at him, shrugged his shoulders, and was silent. Then Reb Nashumtzi laid his whole plan before him, the object of his coming. "I will be frank with you," he said in concluding his long speech. "I had no idea of the extent of the misfortune. To the rescue, men, save yourselves. Take it to heart, think of what it means to have houses like these, and all these riches. It is a most terrible misfortune. Now I see what a reform of the whole world my plan amounts to, what deliverance it will bring to all men." The president looked him straight in the face. He saw the man was not mad, but that he had the limited horizon of one born and bred in a small provincial town and in the atmosphere of the house of study. He also saw that it would be impossible to convince him by proofs that his idea was a mistaken one. For a little while he pitied him in silence, then he hit upon an expedient, and said, "You are quite right, Rabbi. Your plan is really a very good one. But I am only one of many. Wilna is full of such unfortunate people. Every one of them must be talked to, and have the thing explained to him. Then, the other party must be spoken to as well, I mean the poor people, so that they shall be willing to take their share of the misfortune. That's not such an easy matter as giving a thing away and getting rid of it." Of course, agreed Reb Nashumtzi. "Look here, Raff of Pumpkin, I will undertake the more difficult part. Let us work together. You shall persuade the rich to give away their misfortune, and I will persuade the poor to take it. Your share of the work will be the easier, because, after all, everybody wants to be rid of his misfortune. Do your part, and as soon as you have finished with the rich, I will arrange for you to be met halfway by the poor." History does not tell how far the Raff of Pumpkin succeeded in Wilna. Only this much is certain, the president never saw him again. Jehiel. Pen name of Judah Lobluin, born, 1845, in Minsk, Lithuania, White Russia, tutor, treasurer to the Brodsky flour mills and a sugar refinery, at Tomishkpol, Podolia, later in Kyiv, began to write in 1860, translator of Beaconsfield's Tankard into Hebrew, Talmudist, mystic, first socialist writer in Hebrew, writer, chiefly in Hebrew, of prose and poetry, contributor to Sholem Aleicham's Judas Volksbibliothek, Ha-Sheha, Harmaliz, Ha-Zephora, and other periodicals. Earth of Palestine. As my readers know, I wanted to do a little stroke of business, to sell the world to come. I must tell you that I came out of it very badly, and might have fallen into some misfortune, if I had had the ware in stock. It fell on this wise: nowadays everyone is squeezed and stifled, Parnos is gone to rack and ruin, and there is no business. I mean, there is business, only not for us Jews. In such bitter times people snatch the bread out of each other's mouths. If it is known that someone has made a find, and started a business, they quickly imitate him. If that one opens a shop, a second does likewise, and a third, and a fourth, if this one makes a contract, the other runs and will do it for less, even if I earn nothing, no more will you. When I gave out that I had the world to come to sell, lots of people gave a start, a business. And before they knew what sort of where it was, and where it was to be had, they began thinking about a shop, and there was still greater interest shown on the part of certain philanthropists, party leaders, public workers, and such like. They knew that when I set up trading in the world to come, I had announced that my business was only with the poor. Well, they understood that it was likely to be profitable, and might give them the chance of licking a bone or two. There was very soon a great tarorum in our little world. People began inquiring where my goods came from. They surrounded me with spies, who were to find out what I did at night, what I did on Sabbath. They questioned the cook, the market woman, but in vain. They could not find out how I came by the world to come. And there blazed up a fire of jealousy and hatred, and they began to inform, to write letters to the authorities about me. Laban the Yellow and Balaam the Blind, you know them, made my boss believe that I do business, that is, that I have capital, that is, but my employer investigated the matter, and seeing that my stock in trade was the world to come, he laughed, and let me alone. The townspeople among whom it was my lot to dwell, those good people who are a great hand at fishing in troubled waters, as soon as they saw the mud rise, snatched up their implements and set to work, informing by letter that I was dealing in contraband. There appeared a red official and swept out a few corners in my house, but without finding a single specimen bit of the world to come, and went away. But I had no peace even then. Every day came a fresh letter informing against me. My good brothers never ceased work. The pious, Orthodox Jews, the Jewry, informed, and said I was a swindler, because the world to come is a thing that is neither fish, flesh, fowl, nor good red herring, and the whole thing was a delusion. The half-civilized people with long trousers and short locks said, on the contrary, that I was making game of religion, so that before long I had enough of it from every side, and made the following resolutions. First, that I would have nothing to do with the world to come and such like things which the Jews did not understand, although they held them very precious. Secondly, that I would not let myself in for selling anything. One of my good friends, an experienced merchant, advised me rather to buy than to sell. There are so many to sell, they will compete with you, inform against you, and behave as no one should. Buying, on the other hand, if you want to buy, you will be esteemed and respected, everyone will flatter you, and be ready to sell to you on credit. Everyone is ready to take money, and with very little capital you can buy the best and most expensive way. The great thing was to get a good name, and then, little by little, by means of credit, one might rise very high. So it was settled that I should buy. I had a little money on hand for a couple of newspaper articles, for which nowadays they pay. I had a bit of reputation earned by a great many articles in Hebrew, for which I received quite nice complimentary letters, and, in case of need, there is a little money owing to me from certain Jewish booksellers of the Muslim, for book sport on commission. Well, I am resolved to buy. But what shall I buy? I look round and take note of all the things a man can buy, and see that I, as a Jew, may not have them. That which I may buy, no matter where, isn't worth a halfpenny. A thing that is of any value, I can't have. And I determined to take to the old way which my great-great-grandfathers bought, and made a fortune in. My parents and the whole family wish for it every day. I resolved to buy, you understand me, Earth of Palestine, and I announced both verbally and in writing to all my good and bad brothers that I wished to become a purchaser of the ware. Oh, what a commotion it made! Hardly was it known that I wished to buy Palestinian earth, than there pounced upon me people of whom I had never thought it possible that they should talk to me, and be in the room with me. The first to come was a kind of Jew with a green shawl, with white shoes, a pale face with a red nose, dark eyes, and yellow locks. He commenced unpacking paper and linen bags, out of which he shook a little sand, and he said to me, "That is from Mother Rachel's grave, from the Shunammite's grave, from the graves of Huldah the prophetess and Deborah." Then he shook out the other bags, and mentioned a whole list of men, from the grave of Enoch, Moses our teacher, Elijah the prophet, Habakkuk, Ezekiel, Jonah, authors of the Talmud, and holy men as many as there be. He assured me that each kind of sand had its own precious distinction, and had, of course, its special price. I had not had time to examine all the bags of sand, when, I got a letter written on blue paper in Rashi script, in which an unknown well-wisher earnestly warned me against buying of the Jew, for neither he nor his father before him had ever been in Palestine, and he had got the sand in from the Andrath hills yonder, and that if I wished for it, he had real Palestinian earth, from the Mount of Olives, with a document from the Palestinian vicegerent, the brisk Rebbitzin, to the effect that she had given of this earth even to the eaters of swine's flesh, of whom it is said, "For their worms shall not die," and they also were saved from worms. My Palestinian Jew, after reading the letter, called down all bad dreams upon the head of the brisk Rebbitzin, and declared among other things that she herself was a dreadful worm, who, etc. He assured me that I ought not to send money to the brisk Rebbitzin. May heaven defend you. It will be thrown away, as it has been 100 times already. And began once more to praise his ways, his earth, saying it was a marvel. I answered him that I wanted real earth of Palestine, earth, not sand out of little bags. Earth, it is earth. He repeated, and became very angry. What do you mean by earth? Am I offering you mud? But that is the way with people nowadays, when they want something Jewish, there is no pleasing them. Only, a thought struck him, if you want another sort, perhaps from the field of Machpelah, I can bring you some Palestinian earth that is earth. Meantime give me something in advance, for, besides everything else, I am a Palestinian Jew. I pushed a coin into his hand, and he went away. Meanwhile the news had spread. My intention to purchase earth of Palestine had been noised abroad, and the little town echoed with my name. In the streets, lanes, and marketplace, the talk was all of me and of how there is no putting a final value on a Jewish soul. One thought he was one of them, and now he wants to buy earth of Palestine. Many of those who met me looked at me askance, the same and not the same. In the synagogue they gave me the best turn at the reading of the law. Jews in shoes and socks wished me a good Sabbath, with great heartiness, and a friendly smile. We understand, you are a deep one, you are one of us after all. In short, they surrounded me, and nearly carried me on their shoulders, so that I really became something of a celebrity. Udell, the living often, worked the hardest. Udell is already a man in years, but everyone calls him the often on account of what befell him on a time. His history is very long and interesting. I will tell it you, in brief. He has a very distinguished father and a very noble mother, and he is an only child, of a very frolicsome disposition, on account of which his father and his mother frequently disagreed. The father used to punish him and beat him, but the boy hid with his mother. In a word, it came to this, that his father gave him into the hands of strangers, to be educated and put into shape. The mother could not do without him, and fell sick of grief. She became a wreck. Her beautiful house was burnt long ago through the boy's doing. One day, when a child, he played with fire, and there was a conflagration, and the neighbors came and built on the site of her palace, and she, the invalid, lies neglected in a corner. The father, who has left the house, often wished to rejoin her, but by no manner of means can they live together without the son, and so the cast-off child became a living often. He roams about in the wide world, comes to a place, and when he has stayed there a little while, they drive him out, because wherever he comes, he stirs up a commotion. As is the way with all orphans, he has many fathers, and everyone directs him, hits him, lectures him. He is always in the way, blamed for everything. It's always his fault. so that he has got into the habit of cowering and shrinking at the mere sight of a stick. Wandering about as he does, he has copied the manners and customs of strange people. In every place where he has been, his very character is hardly his own. His father has tried both to threaten and to persuade him into coming back, saying they would then all live together as before, but Udell has got to like living from home. He enjoys the scrapes he gets into, and even the blows they earn for him. No matter how people knock him about, pull his hair, and draw his blood, the moment they want him to make friendly advances, there he is again, alert and smiling, turns the world topsy-turvy, and won't hear of going home. It is remarkable that Udell, who was no fool, and has a head for business, the instant people look kindly on him, imagines they like him, although he has had 1,000 proofs to the contrary. He has lately been of such consequence in the eyes of the world that they have begun to treat him in a new way, and they drive him out of every place at once. The poor boy has tried his best to please, but it was no good. They knocked him about till he was covered with blood, took every single thing he had, and empty-handed, naked, hungry, and beaten as he is, they shouted him be off from every side. Now he lives in narrow streets, in the small towns, hidden away in holes in the corners. He very often hasn't enough to eat, but he goes on in his old way, creeps into tight places, dances at all the weddings, loves to meddle, everything concerns him, and where two come together, he is the third. I have known him a long time, ever since he was a little boy. He always struck me as being very wild, but I saw that he was of a noble disposition, only that he had grown rough from living among strangers. I loved him very much, but in later years he treated me to hot and cold by turns. I must tell you that when Udell had eaten his fill, he was always very merry, and minded nothing, but when he had been kicked out by his landlord, and went hungry, then he was angry, and grew violent over every trifle. He would attack me for nothing at all. We quarrelled and parted company, that is, I loved him at a distance. When he wasn't just in my sight, I felt a great pity for him, and a wish to go to him, but hardly had I met him than he was at the old game again, and I had to leave him. Now that I was together with him in my native place, I found him very badly off. He hadn't enough to eat. The town was small and poor, and he had no means of supporting himself. When I saw him in his bitter and dark distress, my heart went out to him. But at such times, as I said before, he is very wild and fanatical. One day, on the 9th of Ab, I felt obliged to speak out, and tell him that sitting in socks, with his forehead on the ground, reciting lamentations, would do no good. Udell misunderstood me, and thought I was laughing at Jerusalem. He began to fire up, and he spread reports of me in the town, and when he saw me in the distance, he would spit out before me. His anger dated from some time past, because one day I turned him out of my house. He declared that I was the cause of all his misfortunes, and now that I was his neighbor, I had resolved to ruin him. He believed that I hated him and played him false. Why should Udell think that? I don't know. Perhaps he feels one ought to dislike him, or else he is so embittered that he cannot believe in the kindly feelings of others. However that may be, Udell continued to speak ill of me, and throw mud at me through the town, crying out all the while that I hadn't a scrap of Jewishness in me. Now that he heard I was buying Palestinian earth, he began by refusing to believe it, and declared it was a take-in and the trick of an apostate. For how could a person who laughed at socks on the 9th of Ab really want to buy earth of Palestine? But when he saw the green shawls and the little bags of earth, he went over, away he has, to the opposite, the exact opposite. He began to worship me, couldn't praise me enough, and talked of me in the back streets, so that the women blessed me aloud. Udell was now much given to my company, and often came in to see me, and was most intimate, although there was no special piousness about me. I was just the same as before, but Udell took this for the best of signs, and thought it proved me to be of extravagant hidden piety. There's a Jew for you, he would cry aloud in the street. Earth of Palestine. There's a Jew. In short, he filled the place with my Jewishness and my hidden orthodoxy. I looked on with indifference, but after a while the affair began to cost me both time and money. The Palestinian beggars and, above all, Udell and the townsfolk obtained for me the reputation of piety, and there came to me Orthodox Jews, treasurers, Kabbalists, beggar students, and especially the Rebbe's followers. They came about me like bees. They were never in the habit of avoiding me, but this was another thing all the same. Before this, when one of the Rebbe's disciples came, he would enter with a respectful demeanor, take off his hat, and, sitting in his cap, would fix his gaze on my mouth with a sweet smile. We both felt that the one and only link between us lay in the money that I gave and he took. He would take it gracefully, put it into his purse, as it might be for someone else, and thank me as though he appreciated my kindness. When I went to see him, he would place a chair for me, and give me preserve. But now he came to me with a free and easy manner, asked for a sip of brandy with a snack to eat, sat in my room as if it were his own, and looked at me as if I were an underling, and he had authority over me. I am the penitent sinner, it is said, and that signifies for him the key to the door of repentance. I have entered into his domain, and he is my Lord and Master. He drinks my health as heartily as though it were his own, and when I press a coin into his hand, he looks at it well, to make sure it is worth his while accepting it. If I happen to visit him, I am on a footing with all his followers. The Chassidim, his trustees, and all his other hangers-on, are my brothers, and came to me when they please, with all the mud on their boots, put their hand into my bosom and take out my tobacco pouch, and give it as their opinion that the brandy is weak, not to talk of holidays, especially Purim and rejoicing of the law, when they troop in with a great noise and vociferation, and drink and dance, and pay as much attention to me as to the cat. In fact, all the townsfolk took the same liberties with me. Before, they asked nothing of me, and took me as they found me. Now they began to demand things of me and to inquire why I didn't do this, and why I did that, and not the other. Shmulk the bather asked me why I was never seen at the bath on Sabbath. Kalman the butcher wanted to know why, among the scape fowls, there wasn't a white one of mine, and even the beadle of the Klaus, who speaks through his nose, and who had never dared approach me, came and insisted on giving me the 39 stripes on the eve of the Day of Atonement. If you are a Jew like other Jews, come and lie down, and you shall be given stripes. And the Palestinian Jews never ceased coming with their bags of earth, and I never ceased rejecting. One day there came a broad-shouldered Jew from over there, with his bag of Palestinian earth. The earth pleased me, and a conversation took place between us on this wise. How much do you want for your earth? For my earth? From anyone else I wouldn't take less than 30 rubles, but from you, knowing you and of you as I do, and as your parents did so much for Palestine, I will take a 25 ruble piece. You must know that a person buys this once and for all. I don't understand you, I answered. 25 rubles. How much earth have you there? How much earth have I? About half a quart. There will be enough to cover the eyes and the face. Perhaps you want to cover the whole body, to have it underneath and on the top and at the sides. Oh, I can bring you some more, but it will cost you 200 or 300 rubles, because, since the good-for-nothings took to coming to Palestine, the earth has got very expensive. Believe me, I don't make much by it, it costs me nearly. I don't understand you, my friend. What's this about bestrewing the body? What do you mean by it? How do you mean, what do you mean by it? Bestrewing the body like that of all honest Jews, after death. Huh? After death? To preserve it? Yes, what else? I don't want it for that. I don't mind what happens to my body after death. I want to buy Palestinian earth for my lifetime. What do you mean? What good can it do you while you're alive? You are not talking to the point, or else you are making game of a poor Palestinian Jew. I am speaking seriously. I want it now, while I live. What is it you don't understand? My Palestinian Jew was greatly perplexed, but he quickly collected himself, and took in the situation. I saw by his artful smile that he had detected a strain of madness in me, and what should he gain by leading me into the paths of reason? Rather let him profit by it. And this he proceeded to do, saying with winning conviction, "Yes, of course, you are right. How right you are. May I ever see the like. People are not wrong when they say, the apple falls close to the tree. You are drawn to the root, and you love the soil of Palestine, only in a different way, like your holy forefathers. May they be good advocates. You are young, and I am old, and I have heard how they used to bestrew their headdress with it in their lifetime, so as to fulfill the scripture verse, and have pity on Zion's dust, and honest Jews shake earth of Palestine into their shoes on the eve of the 9th of Ab, and at the meal before the fast they dip an egg into Palestinian earth. New, Fane. I never expected so much of you, and I can say with truth, there's a Jew for you. Well, in that case, you will require 2 pots of the earth, but it will cost you a deal." "We are evidently at cross purposes," I said to him. "What are 2 potfuls? What is all this about bestrewing the body? I want to buy Palestinian earth in Palestine, do you understand? I want to buy, in Palestine, a little bit of earth, a few dessiatines." "Huh? I didn't quite catch it. What did you say?" And my Palestinian Jew seized hold of his right ear, as though considering what he should do. Then he said cheerfully, "Ha, aha. You mean to secure for yourself a burial place, also for after death? Oh yes, indeed, you are a holy man and no mistake. Well, you can get that through me, too. Give me something in advance, and I shall manage it for you all right at a bargain." "Why do you go on at me with your after death?" I cried angrily. "I want a bit of earth in Palestine. I want to dig it, and sow it, and plant it." "Huh? What? Sow it and plant it? That is, you only mean, may all bad dreams." And stammering thus, he scraped all the scattered earth, little by little, into his bag, gradually got nearer the door, and was gone. It was not long before the town was seething and bubbling like a kettle on a boil. Everyone was upset as though by some misfortune, angry with me, and still more with himself. How could we be so mistaken? He doesn't want to buy Palestinian earth at all. He doesn't care what happens to him when he's dead. He laughs. He only wants to buy earth in Palestine, and set up villages there. He remains one of them. He is what he is, a skeptic. So they said in all the streets, all the householders in the town, the women in the marketplace, at the bath. They went about abstracted, and as furious as though I had insulted them, made fools of them, taken them in, and all of a sudden they became cold and distant to me. The pious Jews were seen no more at my house. I received packages from Palestine one after the other. One had a black seal, on which was scratched a black ram's horn, and inside, in large characters, was a ban from the brisk Rebbitzin, because of my wishing to make all the Jews unhappy. Other packets were from different Palestinian beggars, who tried to compel me, with fair words and foul, to send them money for their travelling expenses and for the samples of earth they enclosed. My fellow townspeople also got packages from over there, warning them against me. I was a dangerous man, a missionary, and it was a mitzvah to be revenged on me. There was an uproar, and no wonder. A letter from Palestine, written in Rashi, with large seals. In short, I was to be put to shame and confusion. Everyone avoided me, nobody came near me. When people were obliged to come to me in money matters or to beg an alms, they entered with deference, and spoke respectfully, in a gentle voice, as to one of them, took the alms or the money, and were out of the door, behind which they abused me, as usual. Only Udell did not forsake me. Udell, the living often, was bewildered and perplexed. He had plenty of work, flew from one house to the other, listening, begging, and tale-bearing, answering and asking questions, but he could not settle the matter in his own mind. Now he looked at me angrily, and again with pity. He seemed to wish not to meet me, and yet he sought occasion to do so, and would look earnestly into my face. The excitement of my neighbors and their behavior to me interested me very little, but I wanted very much to know the reason why I had suddenly become abhorrent to them. I could by no means understand it. Once there came a wild, dark night. The sky was covered with black clouds, there was a drenching rain and hail and a stormy wind. It was pitch dark, and it lightened and thundered, as though the world were turning upside down. The great thunderclaps and the hail broke a good many people's windows, the wind tore at the roofs, and everyone hid inside his house, or wherever he found a corner. In that dreadful dark night my door opened, and in came Udell, the living orphan. He looked as though someone were pushing him from behind, driving him along. He was as white as the wall, cowering, beaten about, helpless as a leaf. He came in, and stood by the door, holding his hat. He couldn't decide, did not know if he should take it off, or not. I had never seen him so miserable, so despairing, all the time I had known him. I asked him to sit down, and he seemed a little quieted. I saw that he was soaking wet, and shivering with cold, and I gave him hot tea, one glass after the other. He sipped it with great enjoyment, and the sight of him sitting there sipping and warming himself would have been very comic, only it was so very sad. The tears came into my eyes. Udell began to brighten up, and was soon Udell, his old self, again. I asked him how it was he had come to me in such a state of gloom and bewilderment. He told me the thunder and the hail had broken all the window panes in his lodging, and the wind had carried away the roof. There was nowhere he could go for shelter, nobody would let him in at night, there was not a soul he could turn to, there remained nothing for him but to lie down in the street and die. And so, he said, having known you so long, I hoped you would take me in, although you are one of them, not at all pious, and, so they say, full of evil intentions against Jews and Jewishness, but I know you are a good man, and will have compassion on me. I forgave Udell his rudeness, because I knew him for an outspoken man, that he was fond of talking, but never did any harm. Seeing him depressed, I offered him a glass of wine, but he refused it. I understood the reason of his refusal, and started a conversation with him. Tell me, Udell Hart, how is it I have fallen into such bad repute among you that you will not even drink a drop of wine in my house? And why do you say that I am one of them, and not pious? A little while ago you spoke differently of me. It just slipped from my tongue, and the truth is you may be what you please, you are a good man. No, Udell, don't try to get out of it. Tell me openly, it doesn't concern me, but I am curious to know, why this sudden revulsion of feeling about me, this change of opinion? Tell me, Udell, I beg of you, speak freely. My gentle words and my friendliness gave Udell great encouragement. The poor fellow, with whom not one of them has as yet spoken kindly. When he saw that I meant it, he began to scratch his head. It seemed as if in that minute he forgave me all my heresies, and he looked at me kindly, and as if with pity. Then, seeing that I awaited an answer, he gave a twist to his earlock, and said gently and sincerely, You wish me to tell you the truth? You insist upon it? You will not be offended? You know that I never take offense at anything you say. Say anything you like, Udell Hart, only speak. Then I will tell you, the town and everyone else is very angry with you on account of your Palestinian earth. You want to do something new, buy earth and plow it and sow, and where? In our land of Israel, in our holy land of Israel. But why, Udell dear, when they thought I was buying Palestinian earth to bestrew me after death, was I looked upon almost like a saint? Circumflex, that's another thing. That showed that you held Palestine holy, for a land whose soil preserves one against being eaten of worms, like any other honest Jew. Well, I ask you, Udell, what does this mean? When they thought I was buying sand for after my death, I was a holy man, a lover of Palestine, and because I want to buy earth and till it, earth, in your holy land, our holy earth in the holy land, in which our best and greatest counted it a privilege to live. I am a blot on Israel. Tell me, Udell, I ask you, why? Because one wants to bestrew himself with Palestinian earth after death. Is one an Orthodox Jew? And when one desires to give oneself wholly to Palestine in life, should one be one of them? Now I ask you, all those 2 Palestinian Jews who came to me with their bags of sand, and were my very good friends, and full of anxiety to preserve my body after death, why have they turned against me on hearing that I wished for a bit of Palestinian earth while I live? Why are they all so interested and such good brothers to the dead, and such bloodthirsty enemies to the living? Why, because I wish to provide for my sad existence, have they noised abroad that I am a missionary, and made up tales against me? Why? I ask you, why, Udell, why? You ask me? How should I know? I only know that ever since Palestine was Palestine, people have gone there to die, that I know, but all this ploughing, sowing, and planting the earth, I never heard of in my life before. Yes, Udell, you are right, because it has been so for a long time. You think so it has to be. That is a real answer to your questions. But why not think back a little? Why should one only go to Palestine to die? Is not Palestinian earth fit to live on? On the contrary, it is some of the very best soil, and when we till it and plant it, we fulfill the precept to restore the Holy Land, and we also work for ourselves, toward the realization of an honest and peaceable life. I won't discuss the matter at length with you today. It seems that you have quite forgotten what all the holy books say about Palestine, and what a precept it is to till the soil. And another question, touching what you said about Palestine being only the to go and die in. Tell me, those Palestinian Jews who were so interested in my death, and brought earth from over there to bestrew me, tell me, are they also only the to die? Did you notice how broad and stout they were? Huh? And they too, when they heard I wanted to live there, fell upon me like wild animals, filling the world with their cries, and made up the most dreadful stories about me. Well, what do you say, Udell? I ask you. Do I know? Said Udell, with a wave of the hand. Is my head to think out things like that? But tell me, I beg, what is the good to you of buying land in Palestine and getting into trouble all round? You ask, what is the good to me? I want to live, do you hear? I want to live. If you can't live without Palestinian earth, why did you not get some before? Did you never want to live till now? Oh, Udell, you are right there. I confess that till now I have lived in a delusion. I thought I was living, but what is the saying ? So long as the thunder is silent. Some thunder has struck you, interrupted Udell, looking compassionately into my face. I will put it briefly. You must know, Udell, that I have been in business here for quite a long time. I worked faithfully, and my chief was pleased with me. I was esteemed and looked up to, and it never occurred to me that things would change, but bad men could not bear to see me doing so well, and they worked hard against me, till one day the business was taken over by my employer's son, and my enemies profited by the opportunity to cover me with calumnies from head to foot, spreading reports about me which it makes one shudder to hear. This went on till the chief began to look askance at me. At first I got pinpricks, malicious hints, then things got worse and worse, and at last they began to push me about, and one day they turned me out of the house, and threw me into a hedge. Presently, when I had reviewed the whole situation, I saw that they could do what they pleased with me. I had no one to rely on. My one-time good friends kept aloof from me. I had lost all within their eyes, with some because, as is the way with people, they took no trouble to inquire into the reason of my downfall, but, hearing all that was said against me, concluded that I was in the wrong. Others, again, because they wished to be agreeable to my enemies. The rest, for reasons without number. In short, reflecting on all this, I saw the game was lost, and there was no saying what might not happen to me. Hitherto I had borne my troubles patiently, with the courage that is natural to me, but now I feel my courage giving way, and I am in fear lest I should fall in my own eyes, in my own estimation, and get to believe that I am worth nothing. And all this because I must needs resort to them, and take all the insults they choose to fling at me, and every outcast has me at his mercy. That is why I want to collect my remaining strength, and buy a parcel of land in Palestine, and, God helping, I will become a bit of a householder. Do you understand? Why must it be just in Palestine? Because I may not, and I cannot, buy in anywhere else. I have tried to find a place elsewhere, but they were afraid I was going to get the upper hand, so down they came, and made a wreck of it. Over there I shall be proprietor myself, that is firstly, and secondly, a great many relations of mine are buried there, in the country where they lived and died. And although you count me as one of them, I tell you I think a great deal of the merits of the fathers, and that it is very pleasant to me to think of living in a land that will remind me of such dear forefathers. And although it will be hard at first, the recollection of my ancestors and the thought of providing my children with a corner of their own and honestly earned bread will give me strength, till I shall work my way up to something. And I hope I will get to something. Remember, Udell, I believe and I hope. You will see, Udell, you know that our brothers consider Palestinian earth a charm against being eaten by worms, and you think that I laugh at it? No, I believe in it. It is quite true that my Palestinian earth will preserve me from worms, only not after death, no, but alive, from such worms as devour and gnaw and poison the whole of life. Udell scratched his nose, gave a rub to the cap on his head, and uttered a deep sigh. Yes, Udell, you sigh. Now do you know what I wanted to say to you? Et. And Udell made a gesture with his hand. What you have to say to me ? Et. Oi, that et. Of yours. Udell, I know it. When you have nothing to answer, and you ought to think, and think something out, you take refuge in it. Just consider for once, Udell, I have a plan for you, too. Remember what you were, and what has become of you. You have been knocking about, driven hither and thither, since childhood. You haven't a house, not a corner, you have become a beggar, a tramp, a nobody, despised and avoided, with unpleasing habits, and living a dog's life. You have very good qualities, a clear head, and acute intelligence. But to what purpose do you put them? You waste your whole intelligence on getting in at back doors and coaxing a bit of bread out of the maidservant, and the mistress is not to know. Can you not devise a means, with that clever brain of yours, how to earn it for yourself? See here, I am going to buy a bit of ground in Palestine. Come with me, Udell, and you shall work, and be a man like other men. You are what they call a living orphan, because you have many fathers. And don't forget that you have one father who lives, and who is only waiting for you to grow better. Well, how much longer are you going to live among strangers? Till now you haven't thought, and the life suited you. You have grown used to blows and contumely. But now that none will let you in, your eyes must have been opened to see your condition, and you must have begun to wish to be different. Only begin to wish. You see, I have enough to eat, and yet my position has become hateful to me, because I have lost my value, and am in danger of losing my humanity. But you are hungry, and one of these days you will die of starvation out in the street. Udell, do just think it over, for if I am right, you will get to be like other people. Your father will see that you have turned into a man, he will be reconciled with your mother, and you will be a father's child, as you were before. Brother Udell, think it over. I talked to my Udell a long time. In the meanwhile, the night had passed. My Udell gave a start, as though waking out of a deep slumber, and went away full of thought. On opening the window, I was greeted by a friendly smile from the rising morning star, as it peeped out between the clouds. And it began to dawn. Isaac Lob Perez. Born 1851, in Samosches, Government of Lublin, Russian Poland, Jewish, philosophical, and general literary education, practiced law in Samosc, a Hasidic town, clerk to the Jewish congregation in Warsaw, and as such collector of statistics on Jewish life, began to write at 25, contributor to Zedenbaum's Judas's Volksblatt, publisher and editor of Die Judasbibliothek, 4 vols, in which he conducted the scientific department, and wrote all the editorials and book reviews, of Literatur und Leben, and of Jomt auf Blattlch, now, 1912, co-editor of Der Freund, Warsaw, Hebrew and Yiddish prose writer and poet, Allegorist, collected Hebrew works, 1899 to 1901, collected Yiddish works, 7 vols, Warsaw and New York, 1909 to 1912, in course of publication. A Woman's Wrath. The small room is dingy as the poverty that clings to its walls. There is a hook fastened to the crumbling ceiling, relic of a departed hanging lamp. The old, peeling stove is girded about with a coarse sack, and leans sideways toward its gloomy neighbor, the black, empty fireplace, in which stands an inverted cooking pot with a chip trim. Beside it lies a broken spoon, which met its fate in unequal contest with the scrapings of cold, stale porridge. The room is choked with furniture. There is a 4-post bed with torn curtains. The pillows visible through their holes have no covers. There is a cradle, with a large, yellow head of a sleeping child, a chest with metal fittings and an open padlock, nothing very precious left in there, evidently. Further, a table and 3 chairs, originally painted red, a cupboard, now somewhat damaged. Add to these a pail of clean water and one of dirty water, an oven rake with a shovel, and you will understand that a pin could hardly drop onto the floor. And yet the room contains him and her beside. She, a middle-aged Jewess, sits on the chest that fills the space between the bed and the cradle. To her right is the one grimy little window, to her left, the table. She is knitting a sock, rocking the cradle with her foot, and listens to him reading the Talmud at the table, with a tearful, Wallachian, singing intonation, and swaying to and fro with a series of nervous jerks. Some of the words he swallows, others he draws out, now he snaps at a word, and now he skips it, some he accentuates and dwells on lovingly, others he rattles out with indifference, like dried peas out of a bag, and never quiet for a moment. First he draws from his pocket a once-red and whole handkerchief, and wipes his nose and brow, then he lets it fall into his lap, and begins twisting his earlocks or pulling at his thin, pointed, faintly grizzled beard. Again, he lays a pulled-out hair from the same between the leaves of his book, and slaps his knees. His fingers coming into contact with the handkerchief, they seize it, and throw a corner in between his teeth. He bites it, lays one foot across the other, and continually shuffles with both feet. All the while his pale forehead wrinkles, now in a perpendicular, now in a horizontal direction, when the long eyebrows are nearly lost below the folds of skin. At times, apparently, he has a sting in the chest, for he beats his left side as though he were saying the Alchats. Suddenly he leans his head to the left, presses a finger against his left nostril, and emits an artificial sneeze, leans his head to the right, and the proceeding is repeated. In between he takes a pinch of snuff, pulls himself together, his voice rings louder, the chair creaks, the table wobbles. The child does not wake, the sounds are too familiar to disturb it. And she, the wife, shriveled and shrunk before her time, sits and drinks in delight. She never takes her eye off her husband, her ear lets no inflection of his voice escape. Now and then, it is true, she sighs. Were he as fit for this world as he is for the other world, she would have a good time of it here, too, here, too. Ma. She consoles herself, who talks of honor. Not everyone is worthy of both tables. She listens. Her shriveled face alters from minute to minute. She is nervous, too. A moment ago it was eloquent of delight. Now she remembers it is Thursday. There isn't a drear to spend in preparation for Sabbath. The light in her face goes out by degrees, the smile fades, then she takes a look through the grimy window, glances at the sun. It must be getting late, and there isn't a spoonful of hot water in the house. The needles pause in her hand, a shadow has overspread her face. She looks at the child, it is sleeping less quietly, and will soon wake. The child is poorly, and there is not a drop of milk for it. The shadow on her face deepens into gloom, the needles tremble and move convulsively. And when she remembers that it is near Passover, that her earrings and the festal candlesticks are at the pawn shop, the chest empty, the lamp sold, then the needles perform murderous antics in her fingers. The gloom on her brow is that of a gathering thunderstorm, lightnings play in her small, grey, sunken eyes. He sits and learns, unconscious of the charged atmosphere, does not see her let the sock fall and begin wringing her finger joins, does not see that her forehead is puckered with misery, one eye closed, and the other fixed on him, her learned husband, with a look fit to send a chill through his every limb, does not see her dry lips tremble and her jaw quiver. She controls herself with all her might, but the storm is gathering fury within her, the least thing, and it will explode. That least thing has happened. He was just translating a Talmudic phrase with quiet delight, and thence we derived that. He was going on with 3, but the word derive was enough, it was the lighted spark, and her heart was the gunpowder. It was ablaze in an instant. Her determination gave way, the unlucky word opened the floodgates, and the waters poured through, carrying all before them. Derived, you say, derived? Oh, derived may you be, Lord of the world, she exclaimed, hoarse with anger, derived may you be. Yes. You? She hissed like a snake. Passover coming, Thursday, and the child ill, and not a drop of milk is there. Huh? Her breath gives out, her sunken breast heaves, her eyes flash. He sits like one turned to stone. Then, pale and breathless, too, from fright, he gets up and edges toward the door. At the door he turns and faces her, and sees that hand and tongue are equally helpless from passion. His eyes grow smaller, he catches a bit of handkerchief between his teeth, retreats a little further, takes a deeper breath, and mutters. Listen, woman, do you know what Betel Torah means? And not letting a husband study in peace, to be always worrying about livelihood, huh? And who feeds the little birds, tell me. Always this want of faith in God, this giving way to temptation, and taking thought for this world. Foolish, ill-natured woman. Not to let a husband study. If you don't take care, you will go to Gehenna. Receiving no answer, he grows bolder. Her face gets paler and paler, she trembles more and more violently, and the paler she becomes, and the more she trembles, the steadier his voice, as he goes on. Gehenna. Fire. Hanging by the tongue. 4 death penalties inflicted by the court. She is silent, her face is white as chalk. He feels that he is doing wrong, that he has no call to be cruel, that he is taking a mean advantage, but he has risen, as it were, to the top, and is boiling over. He cannot help himself. Do you know, he threatens her, what skilla means? It means stoning, to throw into a ditch and cover up with stones. Srefo, burning, that is, pouring a spoonful of boiling lead into the inside. Harg, beheading, that means they cut off your head with a sword. Like this, and he passes a hand across his neck. Then chenek, strangling. Do you hear? To strangle. Do you understand? And all 4 for making light of the Torah. For Betel Torah. His heart is already sore for his victim, but he is feeling his power over her for the first time, and it has gone to his head. Silly woman. He had never known how easy it was to frighten her. That comes of making light of the Torah. He shouts, and breaks off. After all, she might come to her senses at any moment, and take up the broom. He springs back to the table, closes the Jemere, and hurries out of the room. I am going to the house of study. He calls out over his shoulder in a milder tone, and shuts the door after him. The loud voice and the noise of the closing door have waked the sick child. The heavy-lidded eyes open, the waxen face puckers, and there is a peevish wail. But she, beside herself, stands rooted to the spot, and does not hear. "Ha!" comes hoarsely at last out of her narrow chest. "So that's it, is it? Neither this world nor the other. Hanging," he says, "stoning, burning, beheading, strangling, hanging by the tongue, boiling lead poured into the inside," he says, "for making light of the Torah, hanging, ha, ha, ha." In desperation. "Yes, I'll hang, but here, and soon. What is there to wait for?" The child begins to cry louder, still she does not hear. "A rope, a rope," she screams, and stares wildly into every corner. "Where is there a rope? I wish he mayn't find a bone of me left. Let me be rid of one Jechna at any rate. Let him try it, let him be a mother for once, see how he likes it. I've had enough of it. Let it be an atonement. An end, an end. A rope, a rope." Her last exclamation is like a cry for help from out of a conflagration. She remembers that they have a rope somewhere. Yes, under the stove. The stove was to have been tied round against the winter. The rope must be there still. She runs and finds the rope, the treasure, looks up at the ceiling, the hook that held the lamp. She need only climb onto the table. She climbs. But she sees from the table that the startled child, weak as it is, has sat up in the cradle, and is reaching over the side. It is trying to get out. "Mame, mame," it sobs feebly. A fresh paroxysm of anger seizes her. She flings away the rope, jumps off the table, runs to the child, and forces its head back into the pillow, exclaiming, "Bother the child. It won't even let me hang myself. I can't even hang myself in peace. It wants to suck. What is the good? You will suck nothing but poison, poison, out of me, I tell you." "There, then, greedy," she cries in the same breath, and stuffs the dried-up breast into his mouth. "There, then, suck away, bite. The treasure. To sleep, in summer-time, in a room 4 yards square, together with a wife and 8 children, is anything but a pleasure, even on a Friday night, and Shmuel woodcutter rises from his bed, though only half through with the night, hot and gasping, hastily pours some water over his fingertips, flings on his dressing gown, and escapes barefoot from the potched jechna of his dwelling. He steps into the street, all quiet, all the shutters closed, and over the sleeping town is a distant, serene, and starry sky. He feels as if he were all alone with God, blessed is he, and he says, looking up at the sky, "Now, Lord of the universe, now is the time to hear me and to bless me with a treasure out of thy treasured house." As he says this, he sees something like a little flame coming along out of the town, and he knows, that is it. He is about to pursue it, when he remembers it is Sabbath, when one mustn't turn. So he goes after it walking. And as he walks slowly along, the little flame begins to move slowly, too, so that the distance between them does not increase, though it does not shorten, either. He walks on. Now and then an inward voice calls to him, "Shmuel, don't be a fool. Take off the dressing gown. Give a jump and throw it over the flame." But he knows it is the evil inclination speaking. He throws off the dressing gown onto his arm, but despite the evil inclination he takes still smaller steps, and rejoices to see that, as soon as he takes these smaller steps, the little flame moves more slowly, too. Thus he follows the flame, and follows it, till he gradually finds himself outside the town. The road twists and turns across fields and meadows, and the distance between him and the flame grows no longer, no shorter. Were he to throw the dressing gown, it would not reach the flame. Meantime the thought revolves in his mind, were he indeed to become possessed of the treasure, he need no longer be a woodcutter. Now, in his later years, He has no longer the strength for the work he had once. He would rent a seat for his wife in the women's shul, so that her Sabbaths and holidays should not be spoiled by their not allowing her to sit here or to sit there. On New Year's Day and the Day of Atonement it is all she can do to stand through the service. Her many children have exhausted her. And he would order her a new dress, and buy her a few strings of pearls. The children should be sent to better Chedarim, and he would cast about for a match for his eldest girl. As it is, the poor child carries her mother's fruit baskets, and never has time so much as to comb her hair thoroughly, and she has long, long plaits, and eyes like a deer. It would be a meritorious act to pounce upon the treasure. The evil inclination again, he thinks. If it is not to be, well, then it isn't. If it were in the week, he would soon know what to do. Or if his Yankel were there, he would have had something to say. Children nowadays, who knows what they don't do on Sabbath, as it is. And the younger one is no better, he makes fun of the teacher in Cheddar. When the teacher is about to administer a blow, they pull his beard. And who's going to find time to see after them, chopping and sawing a whole day through? He sighs and walks on and on, now and then glancing up into the sky. Lord of the universe, of whom are you making trial? Shmuel woodcutter? If you do mean to give me the treasure, give it me. It seems to him that the flame proceeds more slowly, but at this very moment he hears a dog bark, and it has a barky nose. That is the dog in Visok. Visok is the first village you come to on leaving the town, and he sees white patches twinkle in the dewy morning atmosphere. Those are the Visok peasant cottages. Then it occurs to him that he has gone a Sabbath day's journey, and he stops short. Yes, I have gone a Sabbath day's journey, he thinks, and says, speaking into the air, you won't lead me astray. It is not a godsend. God does not make sport of us, it is the work of a demon. And he feels a little angry with the thing, and turns and hurries toward the town, thinking, I won't say anything about it at home, because, first, they won't believe me, and if they do, they'll laugh at me. And what have I done to be proud of? The Creator knows how it was, and that is enough for me. Besides, she might be angry, who can tell? The children are certainly naked and barefoot, poor little things. Why should they be made to transgress the command to honor one's father? No, he won't breathe a word. He won't even ever remind the Almighty of it. If he really has been good, the Almighty will remember without being told. And suddenly he is conscious of a strange, lightsome, inward calm, and there is a delicious sensation in his limbs. Money is, after all, dross. Riches may even lead a man from the right way, and he feels inclined to thank God for not having brought him into temptation by granting him his wish. He would like, if only, to sing a song. Our Father, our King is one he remembers from his early years, but he feels ashamed before himself, and breaks off. He tries to recollect one of the cantor's melodies, a Sinai tune, when suddenly he sees that the identical little flame which he left behind him is once more preceding him, and moving slowly townward, and the distance between them neither increases nor diminishes, as though the flame were taking a walk, and he were taking a walk, just taking a little walk in honor of Sabbath. He is glad in his heart and watches it. The sky pales, the stars begin to go out, the east flushes, a narrow pink stream flows lengthwise over his head, and still the flame flickers onward into the town, enters his own street. There is his house. The door, he sees, is open. Apparently, he forgot to shut it. And, lo and behold, the flame goes in at his own house door. He follows, and sees it disappear beneath the bed. All are asleep. He goes softly up to the bed, stoops down, and sees the flame spinning round underneath it, like a top, always in the same place, takes his dressing gown, and throws it down under the bed, and covers up the flame. No one hears him, and now a golden morning beam steals in through the chink in the shutter. He sits down on the bed, and makes a vow not to say a word to anyone till Sabbath is over, not half a word, lest it cause desecration of the Sabbath. She could never hold her tongue, and the children certainly not. They would at once want to count the treasure, to know how much there was, and very soon the secret would be out of the house and into the shul, the house of study, and all the streets, and people would talk about his treasure, about luck, and people would not say their prayers, or wash their hands, or say grace, as they should, and he would have led his household and half the town into sin. No, not a whisper. And he stretches himself out on the bed, and pretends to be asleep. And this was his reward, when, after concluding the Sabbath, he stooped down and lifted up the dressing gown under the bed. There lay a sack with 1,000,000 of gulden, an almost endless number. The bed was a large one, and he became one of the richest men in the place. And he lived happily all the years of his life. Only, his wife was continually bringing up against him, Lord of the world, how could a man have such a heart of stone, as to sit a whole summer day and not say a word, not to his own wife, not one single word. And there was I, she remembers, crying over my prayer as I said God of Abraham, and crying so, for there wasn't a drear left in the house. Then he consoles her, and says with a smile, who knows? Perhaps it was all thanks to our God of Abraham that it went off so well. It as well. You ask how it is that I remained a Jew? Whose merit it is? Not through my own merits nor those of my ancestors. I was a 6-year-old cheddar boy, my father a countryman outside Wilna, a householder in a small way. No, I remained a Jew thanks to the Shpol grandfather. How do I come to mention the Shpol grandfather? What has the Shpol grandfather to do with it, you ask? The Shpol grandfather was no Shpol grandfather then. He was a young man, suffering exile from home and kindred, wandering with a troop of mendicants from congregation to congregation, from friendly inn to friendly inn, in all respects one of them. What difference his heart may have shown, who knows? And after these journeyman years, the time of revelation had not come even yet. He presented himself to the rabbinical board in Wilna, took out a certificate, and became a shoshay in a village. He roamed no more, but remained in the neighborhood of Wilna. The Misnagdim, however, have a wonderful flair, and they suspected something, began to worry and calumniate him, and finally they denounced him to the rabbinical authorities as a transgressor of the law, of the whole law. What Misnagdim are capable of, to be sure. As I said, I was then 6 years old. He used to come to us to slaughter small cattle, or just to spend the night, and I was very fond of him. Whom else, except my father and mother, should I have loved? I had a teacher, a passionate man, a destroyer of souls, and this other was a kind and genial creature, who made you feel happy if he only looked at you. The calumnies did their work, and they took away his certificate. My teacher must have had a hand in it, because he heard of it before anyone, and the next time the shoshay came, he exclaimed apostate, took him by the scruff of his coat, and bundled him out of the house. It cut me to the heart like a knife, only I was frightened to death of the teacher, and never stirred. But a little later, when the teacher was looking away, I escaped and began to run after the shoshay across the road, which, not far from the house, lost itself in a wood that stretched all the way to Wilna. What exactly I proposed to do to help him, I don't know, but something drove me after the poor shoshay. I wanted to say good-bye to him, to have one more look into his nice, kindly eyes. But I ran, and hurt my feet against the stones in the road, and saw no one. I went to the right, down into the wood, thinking I would rest a little on the soft earth of the wood. I was about to sit down, when I heard a voice. It sounded like his voice, farther on in the wood, half speaking and half singing. I went softly towards the voice, and saw him some way off, where he stood swaying to and fro under a tree. I went up to him. He was reciting the Song of Songs. I look closer and see that the tree under which he stands is different from the other trees. The others are still bare of leaves, and this one is green and in full leaf. It shines like the sun, and stretches its flowery branches over the shoshay's head like a tent. and a quantity of birds hop among the twigs and join in singing the Song of Songs. I am so astonished that I stand there with open mouth and eyes, rooted like the trees. He ends his chant, the tree is extinguished, the little birds are silent, and he turns to me, and says affectionately, "Listen, Udell is my name, I have a request to make of you." "Really?" I answer joyfully, and I suppose he wishes me to bring him out some food, and I am ready to run and bring him a whole Sabbath dinner, when he says to me, "Listen, keep what you saw to yourself." This sobers me, and I promise seriously and faithfully to hold my tongue. Listen again. You are going far away, very far away, and the road is a long road. I wonder, however should I come to travel so far? And he goes on to say, they will knock the Rebbe's Torah out of your head, and you will forget father and mother, but see you keep to your name. You are called Udell, remain a Jew. I am frightened, but cry out from the bottom of my heart, surely, as surely may I live. Then, because my own idea clung to me, I added, don't you want something to eat? And before I finished speaking, he had vanished. The second week after they fell upon us and led me away as a Cantonist, to be brought up among the Gentiles and turned into a soldier. Time passed, and I forgot everything, as he had foretold. They knocked it all out of my head. I served far away, deep in Russia, among snows and terrific frosts, and never set eyes on a Jew. There may have been hidden Jews about, but I knew nothing of them. I knew nothing of Sabbath and festival, nothing of any fast. I forgot everything. But I held fast to my name. I did not change my coin. The more I forgot, the more I was inclined to be quit of my torments and trials, to make an end of them by agreeing to a Christian name. But whenever the bad thought came into my head, he appeared before me, the same Shoshe, and I heard his voice say to me, keep your name, remain a Jew. And I knew for certain that it was no empty dream, because every time I saw him older and older, his beard and locks grayer, his face paler. Only his eyes remained the same kind eyes, and his voice, which sounded like a violin, never altered. Once they flogged me, and he stood by and wiped the cold sweat off my forehead, and stroked my face, and said softly, don't cry out. We ought to suffer. Remain a Jew. And I bore it without a cry, without a moan, as though they had been flogging not me. Once, during the last year, I had to go as a sentry to a public house behind the town. It was evening, and there was a snowstorm. The wind lifted patches of snow, and ground them to needles, rubbed them to dust, and this snow dust and these snow needles were whirled through the air, flew into one's face and pricked. You couldn't keep an eye open. You couldn't draw your breath. Suddenly I saw some people walking past me, not far away, and one of them said in Yiddish, this is the first night of Passover. Whether it was a voice from God, or whether some people really passed me, to this day I don't know, but the words fell upon my heart like lead, and I had hardly reached the tavern and begun to walk up and down, when a longing came over me, a sort of heartache, that is not to be described. I wanted to recite the Haggadah, and not a word of it could I recall. Not even the 4 questions I used to ask my father. I felt it all lay somewhere deep down in my heart. I used to know so much of it, when I was only 6 years old. I felt, if only I could have recalled one simple word, the rest would have followed and risen out of my memory one after the other, like sleepy birds from beneath the snow. But that one first word is just what I cannot remember. Lord of the universe, I cried fervently, one word, only one word. As it seems, I made my prayer in a happy hour, for we were slaves came into my head just as if it had been thrown down from heaven. I was overjoyed. I was so full of joy that I felt it brimming over. And then the rest all came back to me, and as I paced up and down on my watch, with my musket on my shoulder, I recited and sang the Haggadah to the snowy world around. I drew it out of me, word after word, like a chain of golden links, like a string of pearls. Oh, but you won't understand. You couldn't understand, unless you had been taken away there, too. The wind, meanwhile, had fallen, the snowstorm had come to an end, and there appeared a clear, twinkling sky, and a shining world of diamonds. It was silent all round, and ever so wide, and ever so white, with a sweet, peaceful, endless whiteness. And over this calm, wide whiteness, there suddenly appeared something still whiter, and lighter, and brighter, wrapped in a robe and a prayer scarf, the prayer scarf over its shoulders, and over the prayer scarf, in front, a silvery white beard, and above the beard, 2 shining eyes, and above them, a sparkling crown, a cap with gold and silver ornaments. And it came nearer and nearer, and went past me, but as it passed me it said, "It is well." It sounded like a violin, and then the figure vanished. But it was the same eyes, the same voice. I took Shpol on my way home, and went to see the old man, for the Rebbe of Shpol was called by the people Der Alter, the Shpol grandfather. And I recognized him again, and he recognized me. Whence a proverb. Drunk all the year round, sober at Purim, is a Jewish proverb, and people ought to know whence it comes. In the days of the famous scholar, Reb Chaim Vital, there lived in Safed, in Palestine, a young man who, not of a spirit spoken, had not been married a year before he became a widower. God's ways are not to be understood. Such things will happen. But the young man was of the opinion that the world, in as far as he was concerned, had come to an end, that, as there is one sun in heaven, so his wife had been the one woman in the world. So he went and sold all the merchandise in his little shop and all the furniture of his room, and gave the proceeds to the head of the Safed Academy, the Rosh HaYeshiva, on condition that he should be taken into the yeshiva and fed with the other scholars, and that he should have a room to himself, where he might sit and learn Torah. The Rosh HaYeshiva took the money for the academy, and they partitioned off a little room for the young man with some boards, in a corner of the attic of the house of study. They carried in a sack with straw, and vessels for washing, and the young man sat himself down to the Talmud. Except on Sabbaths and holidays, when the householders invited him to dinner, he never set eyes on a living creature. Food sufficient for the day, and a clean shirt in honor of Sabbaths and festivals, were carried up to him by the beadle, and whenever he heard steps on the stair, he used to turn away, and stand with his face to the wall, till whoever it was had gone out again and shut the door. In a word, he became a Porush, for he lived separate from the world. At first people thought he wouldn't persevere long, because he was a lively youth by nature, but as week after week went by, and the Porush sat and studied, and the tearful voice in which he intoned the Gemara was heard in the street half through the night, or else he was seen at the attic window, his pale face raised towards the sky, then they began to believe in him, and they hoped he might in time become a mighty man in Israel, and perhaps even a wonder worker. They said so to the Rebbe, Chaim Vital, but he listened, shook his head, and replied, God granted me last. Meantime a little wonder really happened. The beadle's little daughter, who used sometimes to carry up the Porush's food for her father, took it into her head that she must have one look at the Porush. What does she? Takes off her shoes and stockings, and carries the food to him barefoot, so noiselessly that she heard her own heart beat. But the beating of her heart frightened her so much that she fell down half the stairs, and was laid up for more than a month in consequence. In her fever she told the whole story, and people began to believe in the Porush more firmly than ever and to wait with increasing impatience till he should become famous. They described the occurrence to Reb Chaim Vital, and again he shook his head, and even sighed, and answered, God grant he may be victorious. And when they pressed him for an explanation of these words, Reb Chaim answered, that as the Porush had left the world, not so much for the sake of heaven as on account of his grief for his wife, it was to be feared that he would be sorely beset and tempted by the other side, and God grant he might not stumble and fall. And Reb Chaim Vital never spoke without good reason. One day the Porush was sitting deep in a book, when he heard something tapping at the door, and fear came over him. But as the tapping went on, he rose, forgetting to close his book, went and opened the door, and in walks a turkey. He let it in, for it occurs to him that it would be nice to have a living thing in the room. The turkey walks past him, and goes and settles down quietly in a corner. And the Porush wonders what this may mean, and sits down again to his book. Sitting there, he remembers that it is going on for Purim. Has someone sent him a turkey out of regard for his study of the Torah? What shall he do with the turkey? Should anyone, he reflects, ask him to dinner, supposing it were to be a poor man, he would send him the turkey on the eve of Purim, and then he would satisfy himself with it also. He has not once tasted foul meat since he lost his wife. Thinking thus, he smacked his lips, and his mouth watered. He threw a glance at the turkey, and saw it looking at him in a friendly way, as though it had quite understood his intention, and was very glad to think it should have the honor of being eaten by a Porush. He could not restrain himself, but was continually lifting his eyes from his book to look at the turkey, till at last he began to fancy the turkey was smiling at him. This startled him a little, but all the same it made him happy to be smiled at by a living creature. The same thing happened at Minsha and Marif. In the middle of the 18 benedictions, he could not for the life of him help looking round every minute at the turkey, who continued to smile and smile. Suddenly it seemed to him, he knew that smile well, the Almighty, who had taken back his wife, had now sent him a smile to comfort him in his loneliness, and he began to love the turkey. He thought how much better it would be, if a rich man were to invite him at Purim, so that the turkey might live. And he thought it in a propitious moment, as we shall presently see, but meantime they brought him, as usual, a platter of groats with a piece of bread, and he washed his hands, and prepared to eat. No sooner, however, had he taken the bread into his hand, and was about to bite into it, than the turkey moved out of its corner, and began peck, 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 towards the bread, by way of asking for some, and as though to say it was hungry, too, and came and stood before him near the table. The Porush thought, he'd better have some, I don't want to be unkind to him, to tease him, and he took the bread and the platter of porridge, and set it down on the floor before the turkey, who pecked and supped away to its heart's content. Next day the Porush went over to the Rosh HaYeshiva, and told him how he had come to have a fellow lodger. He used always to leave some porridge over, and today he didn't seem to have had enough. The Rosh HaYeshiva saw a hungry face before him. He said he would tell this to the Rebbe, vital, so that he might pray, and the evil spirit, if such indeed it was, might depart. Meantime he would give orders for 2 pieces of bread and 2 plates of porridge to be taken up to the attic, so that there should be enough for both, the Porush and the turkey. Reb Chaim Vital, however, to whom the story was told in the name of the Rosh HaYeshiva, shook his head, and declared with a deep sigh that this was only the beginning. Meanwhile the Porush received a double portion and was satisfied, and the turkey was satisfied, too. The turkey even grew fat. And in a couple of weeks or so the Porush had become so much attached to the turkey that he prayed every day to be invited for Purim by a rich man, so that he might not be tempted to destroy it. And, as we intimated, that temptation, anyhow, was spared him, for he was invited to dinner by one of the principal householders in the place, and there was not only turkey, but every kind of tasty dish, and wine fit for a king. And the best Purim players came to entertain the rich man, his family, and the guests who had come to him after their feast at home. And our Porush gave himself up to enjoyment, and ate and drank. Perhaps he even drank rather more than he ate, for the wine was sweet and grateful to the taste, and the warmth of it made its way into every limb. Then suddenly a change came over him. The Ahasuerus play had begun. Vashti will not do the king's pleasure and come into the banquet as God made her. Esther soon finds favor in her stead. She is given over to Hieger, the keeper of the women, to be purified, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with other sweet perfumes. And our Porush grew hot all over, and it was dark before his eyes. Then red streaks flew across his field of vision, like tongues of fire, and he was overcome by a strange, wild longing to be back at home, in the attic of the house of study, a longing for his own little room, his quiet corner, a longing for the turkey, and he couldn't bear it, and even before they had said grace he jumped up and ran away home. He enters his room, looks into the corner habitually occupied by the turkey, and stands amazed. The turkey has turned into a woman, a most beautiful woman, such as the world never saw, and he begins to tremble all over. And she comes up to him, and takes him around the neck with her warm, white, naked arms, and the Porush trembles more and more, and begs, "Not here, not here, it is a holy place, there are holy books lying about." Then she whispers into his ear that she is the Queen of Sheba, that she lives not far from the house of study, by the river, among the tall reeds, in a palace of crystal, given her by King Solomon. And she draws him along, she wants him to go with her to her palace. And he hesitates and resists, and he goes. Next day, there was no turkey, and no Porush, either. They went to Reb Chaim Vital, who told them to look for him along the bank of the river, and they found him in a swamp among the tall reeds, more dead than alive. They rescued him and brought him round, but from that day he took to drink. And Reb Chaim Vital said, it all came from his great longing for the Queen of Sheba, that when he drank, he saw her, and they were to let him drink, only not at Purim, because at that time she would have great power over him. Hence the proverb, drunk all the year round, sober at Purim. Mordecai Spector. Born, 1859, in Amman, government of Kyiv, Little Russia, education Hasidic, entered business in 1878, wrote first sketch, a Roman on Libby, in 1882, contributor to Zedenbaum's Judas's Volksblatt, 1884 to 1887, founded, in 1888, and edited Der Hausfreund, at Warsaw, editor of Warsaw daily papers, Anseleben, and, at present, 1912, Das Neue Leben, writer of novels, historical romances, and sketches in Yiddish, contributed to numerous periodicals, compiled a volume of more than 2,000 Jewish proverbs. An original strike. I was invited to a wedding. Not a wedding at which ladies wore low dress, and scattered powder as they walked, and the men were in frock coats and white gloves, and had waxed moustaches. Not a wedding where you ate of dishes with outlandish names, according to a printed card, and drank wine dating, according to the label, from the reign of King Sobieski, out of bottles dingy with the dust of yesterday. No, but a Jewish wedding, where the men, women, and girls wore the Sabbath and holiday garments in which they went to shul, a wedding where you whet your appetite with sweet cakes and apple tart, and sit down to Sabbath fish, with fresh rolls, golden soup, stuffed fowl, and roast duck, and the wine is in large, clear, white bottles, a wedding with a calling to the reading of the Torah of the bridegroom, a party on the Sabbath preceding the wedding, a good night play performed by the musicians, and a bridegroom's dinner in his native town, with a table spread for the poor. Reb Yitzchak Isaac Berkover had made a feast for the poor at the wedding of each of his children, and now, on the occasion of the marriage of his youngest daughter, he had invited all the poor of the little town Lipovets to his village home, where he had spent all his life. It is the day of the ceremony under the canopy, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the poor, sent for early in the morning by a messenger, with the 3 great wagons, are not there. Lipovets is not more than 5 versts away. What can have happened? The parents of the bridal couple and the assembled guests wait to proceed with the ceremony. At last the messenger comes riding on a horse unharnessed from his vehicle, but no poor. Why have you come back alone? Demands Reb Yitzchak Isaac. They won't come, replies the messenger. What do you mean by they won't come? Asked everyone in surprise. They say that unless they are given a kerbel apiece, they won't come to the wedding. All laugh, and the messenger goes on. There was a wedding with a dinner to the poor in Lipovets today, too, and they have eaten and drunk all they can, and now they've gone on strike, and declare that unless they are promised to Kerbal ahead, they won't move from the spot. The strike leaders are the crooked man with 2 crutches, Makabel the long, Feuilletonist the stammerer, and Yankel von Fatch. The others would perhaps have come, but these won't let them. So I didn't know what to do. I argued a whole hour, and got nothing by it, so then I unharnessed a horse, and came at full speed to know what was to be done. We of the company could not stop laughing, but Reb Yitzchok was very angry. Well, and you bargained with them? Won't they come for less? He asked the messenger. Yes, I bargained, and they won't take a kopeck less. Have their prices gone up so high as all that? Exclaimed Reb Yitzchok with a satirical laugh. Why did you leave the wagons? We shall do without the tramps, that's all. How could I tell? I didn't know what to do. I was afraid you would be displeased. Now I'll go and fetch the wagons back. Wait. Don't be in such a hurry, take time. Reb Yitzchok began consulting with the company and with himself. What an idea! Who ever heard of such a thing? Poor people telling me what to do, haggling with me over my wanting to give them a good dinner and a nice present each, and saying they must be paid in rubles, otherwise it's no bargain. Ha! Ha! For 2 guldens each it's not worth their while. It cost them too much to stock the ware. 30 kopecks wouldn't pay them. I like their impertinence. Mischief take them, I shall do without them. Let the musicians play. Where is the beadle? They can begin putting the veil on the bride. But directly afterwards he waved his hands. Wait a little longer. It is still early. Why should it happen to me? Why should my pleasure be spoilt? Now I've got to marry my youngest daughter without a dinner to the poor. I would have given them half a ruble each. It's not the money I mind, but fancy bargaining with me. Well, there, I have done my part, and if they won't come, I'm sure they're not wanted. Afterwards they'll be sorry. They don't get a wedding like this every day. We shall do without them. Well, can they put the veil on the bride? The beadle came and inquired. Yes, they can. No, tell them to wait a little longer. Nearly all the guests, who were tired of waiting, cried out that the tramps could very well be missed. Reb Yitzchok's face suddenly assumed another expression, the anger vanished, and he turned to me and a couple of other friends, and asked if we would drive to the town, and parley with the revolted alms-gatherers. He has no brains, one can't depend on him, he said, referring to the messenger. A horse was harnessed to a conveyance, and we drove off, followed by the mounted messenger. A revolt, a strike of alms-gatherers, how do you like that? We asked one another all the way. We had heard of workmen striking, refusing to work except for a higher wage, and so forth, but a strike of paupers insisting on larger alms as pay for eating a free dinner, such a thing had never been known. In 20 minutes' time, we drove into Lipovets. In the marketplace, in the center of the town, stood the 3 great peasant wagons, furnished with fresh straw. The small horses were standing unharnessed, eating out of their nose bags. Round the wagons were 100 poor folk, some dumb, others lame, the greater part blind, and half the town urchins with as many men. All of them were shouting and making a commotion. The crooked one sat on the wagon, and banged it with his crutches. Long Makabel, with a red plaster on his neck, stood beside him. These 2 leaders of the revolt were addressing the people, the meek of the earth. Ha, ha! Exclaimed Long Makabel, as he caught sight of us and the messenger. They have come to beg our acceptance. To beg our acceptance, shouted the crooked one, and banged his crutch. Why won't you come to the wedding, to the dinner? We inquired. Everyone will be given alms. How much? They asked all together. We don't know, but you will take what they offer. Will they give it us in Kerbulch? Because, if not, We don't go. There will be a hole in the sky if you don't go, cried some of the urchins present. The alms-gatherers threw themselves on the urchins with their sticks, and there was a bit of a row. Macabre along, standing on the cart, drew himself to his full height, and began to shout. Hush, hush, hush. Quiet, you crazy cripples. One can't hear oneself speak. Let us hear what those have to say who are worth listening to. And he turned to us with the words. You must know, dear Jews, that unless they distribute kerbulch among us, we shall not budge. Never you fear. Rebbe Yitzchak won't marry his youngest daughter without us, and where is he to get others of us now? To send to Lunitz would cost him more in conveyances, and he would have to put off the marriage. What do they suppose? That because we are poor people they can do what they please with us? And a new striker hitched himself up by the wheel, blind of one eye, with a tied-up jaw. No one can oblige us to go. Even the chief of police and the governor cannot force us. Either it's kerbulch, or we stay where we are. Cake kerbulch came from the stammerer. Nenbulch, put in Yankel von Fatch, speaking through his small nose. No, more, called out a couple of merry paupers. Kerbulch, kerbulch, shouted the rest in concert. And through their shouting and their speeches sounded such a note of anger and of triumph, it seemed as though they were pouring out all the bitterness of soul collected in the course of their sad and luckless lives. They had always kept silence, had to keep silence, had to swallow the insults offered them along with the farthings, and the dry bread, and the scraped bones, and this was the first time they had been able to retaliate. The first time they had known how it felt to be entreated by the fortunate in all things, and they were determined to use their opportunity of asserting themselves to the full, to take their revenge. In the word kerbulch lay the whole sting of their resentment. And while we talked and reasoned with them, came a second messenger from Rebbe Yitzchak to say that the paupers were to come at once, and they would be given a ruble each. There was a great noise and scrambling, the 3 wagons filled with alms-gatherers, one crying out, "Oh my bad hand!" Another, "Oh my foot!" And a third, "Oh my poor bones!" The merry ones made antics, and sang in their places, while the horses were put in, and the procession started at a cheerful trot. The urchins gave a great hurrah, and threw little stones after it, with squeals and whistles. The poor folks must have fancied they were being pelted with flowers and sent off with songs, they looked so happy in the consciousness of their victory. For the first and perhaps the last time in their lives, they had spoken out, and got their own way. After the canopy and the chicken soup, that is, at supper, tables were spread for the friends of the family and separate ones for the alms-gatherers. Rebbe Yitzchak and the members of his own household served the poor with their own hands, pressing them to eat and drink. L'chaim to you, Rebbe Yitzchak. May you have pleasure in your children, and be a great man, a great rich man. Desired the poor. Long life to all of you, brethren. Drink in health, God help all Israel, and you among them. Replying Rebbe Yitzchak. After supper the band played, and the alms-gatherers, with Rebbe Yitzchak, danced merrily in a ring round the bridegroom. Then who was so happy as Rebbe Yitzchak? He danced in the ring, the silk skirts of his long coat flapped and flew like eagle's wings, tears of joy fell from his shining eyes, and his spirits rose to the 7th heaven. He laughed and cried like a child, and exchanged embraces with the alms-gatherers. Brothers, he exclaimed as he danced, let us be merry, let us be Jews. Musicians, give us something cheerful, something gayer, livelier, louder. This is what you call a Jewish wedding. This is how a Jew makes merry. So the guests and the alms-gatherers clapped their hands in time to the music. Yes, dear readers, it was what I call a Jewish wedding. A gloomy wedding. They handed Gittel a letter that had come by post. She put on her spectacles, sat down by the window, and began to read. She read, and her face began to shine, and the wrinkled skin took on a little color. It was plain that what she read delighted her beyond measure. She devoured the words, caught her breath, and wept aloud in the fullness of her joy. At last, blessed be his dear name, whom I am not worthy to mention. I do not know, God in you, how to thank thee for the mercy thou hast shown me. Beil. Where is Beil? Where is Yossel? Children, come, make haste and wish me joy. A great joy has befallen us. Send for Avery Mel, tell him to come with Zlatk and all the children. Thus Gittel, while she read the letter, never ceased calling everyone into the room, never ceased reading and calling and reading, and devouring the words as she read. Every soul who happened to be at home came running. Good luck to you. Good luck to us all. Moishel has become engaged in Warsaw, and invites us all to the wedding, Gittel explained. There, read the letter, Lord of the world, may it be in a propitious hour, may we all have comfort in one another, may we hear nothing but good news of one another and of all Israel. Read it, children. He writes that he has a very beautiful bride, well favored, with a large dowry. Lord of the world, I am not worthy of the mercy thou hast shown me, repeated Gittel over and over, as she paced the room with uplifted hands, while her daughter Beil took up the letter in her turn. The children and everyone in the house, including the maid from the kitchen, with rolled-up sleeves and wet hands, encircled Beil as she read aloud. Read louder, Beilechk, so that I can hear, so that we can all hear, begged Gittel, and there were tears of happiness in her eyes. The children jumped for joy to see grandmother so happy. The word wedding, which Beil read out of the letter, contained the promise of all delightful things, musicians, pancakes, new frocks and suits, and they could not keep themselves from dancing. The maid, too, was heartily pleased. She kept on singing out, "Oi, what a bride, beautiful as gold," and did not know what to be doing next. Should she go and finish cooking the dinner, or should she pull down her sleeves and make holiday? The hiss of a pot boiling over in the kitchen interrupted the letter reading, and she was requested to go and attend to it forthwith. The bride sends us a separate greeting, long life to her, may she live when my bones are dust. Let us go to the provisor, he shall read it, it is written in French. The provisor, the apothecary's foreman, who lived in the same house, said the bride's letter was not written in French, but in Polish, that she called Gittel her second mother, that she loved her son Moses as her life, that he was her world, that she held herself to be the most fortunate of girls, since God had given her Moses, that Gittel, once more, was her second mother, and she felt like a dutiful daughter towards her, and hoped that Gittel would love her as her own child. The bride declared further that she kissed her new sister, Beil, 1,000 times, together with Zlatk and their husbands and children, and she signed herself your forever devoted and loving daughter Agina. An hour later all Gittel's children were assembled round her, her eldest son Avimel with his wife, Zlatk and her little ones, Beil's husband, and her son-in-law Yossel. All read the letter with eager curiosity. Brandy and spice cakes were placed on the table, wine was sent for, they drank healths, wished each other joy, and began to talk of going to the wedding. Gittel, very tired with all she had gone through this day, went to lie down for a while to rest her head, which was all in a whirl, but the others remained sitting at the table, and never stopped talking of Moshe. I can imagine a sort of engagement Moshe has made, begging his pardon, remarked the daughter-in-law, and wiped her pale lips. I should think so, a man who's been a bachelor up to 30. It's easy to fancy the sort of bride, and the sort of family she has, if they accepted Moshe as a suitor, agreed the daughter. God helping, this ought to make a man of him, sighed Moshe's elder brother, he's cost us trouble and worry enough. It's your fault, Yossel told him. If I'd been his elder brother, he would have turned out differently. I should have directed him like a father, and taken him well in hand. You think so, But when God wishes to punish a man through his own child going astray, nothing is of any use. These are not the old times, when young people feared a rabbi, and respected their elders. Nowadays the world is topsy-turvy, and no sooner has a boy outgrown his childhood than he does what he pleases, and parents are nowhere. What have I left undone to make something out of him, so that he should be a credit to his family? Then, he was left and often very early. Perhaps he would have obeyed his father, may he enter a lightsome paradise, but for a brother and his mother, he paid them as much attention as last year's snow, and, if you said anything to him, he answered rudely, and neither coaxing nor scolding was any good. Now, please God, he'll make a fresh start, and give up his antics before it's too late. His poor mother. She's had trouble enough on his account, as we all know. I let fall a tear and said, if our father, may he be a kind advocate, were alive, Moishel would never have made an engagement like this. Who knows what sort of connections they will be? I can see them, begging his pardon, from here. Is he likely to have asked anyone's advice? He always had a will of his own, did what he wanted to do, never asked his mother, or his sister, or his brother, beforehand. Now he's a bridegroom at 30 if he's a day, and we are all asked to the wedding, are we really? And we shall soon all be running to see the fine sight, such as never was seen before. We are no such fools. He thinks himself the clever one now, so he wants us to be at the wedding, only says it out of politeness. We must go, all the same, said Avrimel. Go and welcome, if you want to, you won't catch me either, answered his sister. There was a deal more discussion and disputing about not going to the wedding, and only congratulating by telegram, for good manners' sake. Since he had asked no one's advice, and engaged himself without them, let him get married without them, too. Gittel, up in her bedroom, could not so soon compose herself after the events of the day. What she had experienced was no trifle. Moishel engaged to be married. She had been through so much on his account in the course of her life. She had loved him, her youngest born, so dearly. He was such a beautiful child that the light of his countenance dazzled you, and bright as the day, so that people opened ears and mouth to hear him talk, and God and men alike envied her the possession of such a boy. I counted on making a match for him, as I did with Avrimel before him. He was offered the best connections, with the families of the greatest rabbis. But, no, he wanted to go on studying. Study here, study there, said I, 16 years old and a bachelor. If you want to study, can't you study at your father-in-law's, Eating Coast? There are books and plenty, thank heaven, of your father's. No, he wanted to go and study elsewhere, asked nobody's advice, and made off, and for 2 months I never had a line. I nearly went out of my mind. Then, suddenly, there came a letter, begging my pardon for not having said goodbye, and would I forgive him, and send him some money, because he had nothing to eat. It tore my heart to think my Moishel, who used to make me happy whenever he enjoyed a meal, should hunger. I sent him some money. I went on sending him money for 3 years. After that he stopped asking for it. I begged him to come home. He made no reply. I don't wish to quarrel with Avrimel, my sister, and her husband, he wrote later. We cannot live together in peace. Why? I don't know. Then, for a time, he left off writing altogether, and the messages we got from him sounded very sad. Now he was in Kyiv, now in Odessa, now in Charkiv, and they told us he was living like any Gentile, had not the look of a Jew at all. Some said he was living with a Gentile woman, a countess, and would never marry in his life. 5 years ago he had suddenly appeared at home, to see his mother, as he said. Gittel did not recognize him, he was so changed. The rest found him quite the stranger. He had a goyish shaven face, with a twisted moustache, and was got up like a rich Gentile, with a purse full of banknotes. His family were ashamed to walk abroad with him. Gittel never ceased weeping and imploring him to give up the countess, remain a Jew, stay with his mother, and she, with God's help, would make an excellent match for him, if he would only alter his appearance and ways just a little. Moishel solemnly assured his mother that he was a Jew, that there was no countess, but that he wouldn't remain at home for 1,000,000 rubles, first, because he had business elsewhere, and secondly, he had no fancy for his native town, there was nothing there for him to do, and to dispute with his brother and sister about religious piety was not worth his while. So Moishel departed, and Gittel wept, wondering why he was different from the other children, seeing they all had the same mother, and she had lived and suffered for all alike. Why would he not stay with her at home? What would he have wanted for there? God be praised, not to sin with her tongue, thanks to God first, and then to him, a lightsome paradise be his. They were provided for, with a house and a few thousand rubles, all that was necessary for their comfort, and a little ready money besides. The house alone, not to sin with her tongue, would bring in enough to make a living. Other people envy us, but it doesn't happen to please him, and he goes wandering about the world, without a wife and without a home, a man 20 and odd years old, and without a home. The rest of the family were secretly well content to be free of such a poor creature, the further off, the better, the shame is less. A letter from him came very seldom after this, and for the last 2 years he had dropped out altogether. Nobody was surprised, for everyone was convinced that Moish would never come to anything. Some told that he was in prison, others knew that he had gone abroad and was being pursued, others, that he had hung himself because he was tired of life, and that before his death he had repented of all his sins, only it was too late. His relations heard all these reports, and were careful to keep them from his mother, because they were not sure that the bad news was true. Gittel bore the pain at her heart in silence, weeping at times over her Moishel, who had got into bad ways, and now, suddenly, this precious letter with its precious news. The Moishel is about to marry, and invites them to the wedding. Thus Gittel, lying in bed in her own room, recalled everything she had suffered through her undutiful son, only now everything was forgotten and forgiven, and her mother's heart was full of love for her Moishel, just as in the days when he toddled about at her apron, and pleased his mother and everyone else. All her thoughts were now taken up with getting ready to attend the wedding. The time was so short, there were only 3 weeks left. When her other children were married, Gittel began her preparations 3 months ahead, and now there were only 3 weeks. Next day she took out her watered silk dress, with the green satin flowers, and hung it up to her, examined it, lest there should be a hook missing. After that she polished her long earrings with chalk, her pearls, her rings, and all her other ornaments, and bought a new yellow silk kerchief for her head, with a large flowery pattern in a lighter shade. A week before the journey to Warsaw they baked spice cakes, pancakes, and almond rolls to take with her, from the bridegroom's side, and ordered a wig for the bride. When her eldest son was married, Gittel had also given the bride silver candlesticks for Friday evenings, and presented her with a wig for the veiling ceremony. And before she left, Gittel went to her husband's grave, and asked him to be present at the wedding as a good advocate for the newly married pair. Gittel started for Warsaw, in grand style, and cheerful and happy, as befits a mother going to the wedding of her favoured son. All those who accompanied her to the station declared that she looked younger and prettier by 20 years, and made a beautiful bridegroom's mother. Besides wedding presents for the bride, Gittel took with her money for wedding expenses, so that she might play her part with becoming lavishness, and people should not think her Moishel came, bless and preserve us, of a low-born family, to show that he was none so forlorn but he had, God be praised and may it be for 120 years to come, a mother, and a sister, and brothers, and came of a well-to-do family. She would show them that she could be as fine a bridegroom's mother as anyone, even, thank God, in Warsaw. Moishel was her last child, and she grudged him nothing. Were he, may he be a good intercessor, alive, he would certainly have graced the wedding better, and spent more money, but she would spare nothing to make a good figure on the occasion. She would treat every connection of the bride to a special dance tune, give the musicians a whole 5-ruble piece for their performance of the vivat, and 2 drielich for the koshetams, besides something for the raf, the cantor, and the beadle, and alms for the poor. What should she save for? She has no more children to marry off, blessed be his dear name, who had granted her life to see her Moishel's wedding. Thus happily did Gittel start for Warsaw. One carriage after another drove up to the wedding reception room in Luga Street, Warsaw, ladies and their daughters, all in evening dress, and smartly attired gentlemen, alighted and went in. The room was full, the band played, ladies and gentlemen were dancing, and those who were not, talked of the bride and bridegroom, and said how fortunate they considered Regina, to have secured such a presentable young man, lively, educated, and intelligent, with quite a fortune, which he had made himself, and a good business. 10,000 rubles dowry with the perfection of a husband was a rare thing nowadays, when a poor professional man, a little doctor without practice, asked 15,000. It was true, they said, that Regina was a pretty girl and a credit to her parents, but how many pretty, bright girls had more money than Regina, and sat waiting? It was above all the mothers of the young ladies present who talked low in this way among themselves. The bride sat on a chair at the end of the room, ladies and young girls on either side of her. Gittel, the bridegroom's mother in her watered silk dress, with the large green satin flowers, was seated between 2 ladies with dresses cut so low that Gittel could not bear to look at them, women with husbands and children daring to show themselves like that at a wedding. Then she could not endure the odor of their bare skin, the powder, pomade, and perfumes with which they were smeared, sprinkled, and wetted, even to their hair. All these strange smells tickled Gittel's nose, and went to her head like a fume. She sat between the 2 ladies, feeling cramped and shut in, unable to stir, and would gladly have gone away. Only where should she, the bridegroom's mother, be sitting, if not near the bride, at the upper end of the room? But all the ladies sitting there are half naked. Should she sit near the door? That would never do. And Gittel remained sitting, in great embarrassment, between the 2 women, and looked on at the reception, and saw nothing but a room full of décolletés, ladies and girls. Gittel felt more and more uncomfortable. It made her quite faint to look at them. One can get over the girls, young things, because a girl has got to please, although no Jewish daughter ought to show herself to everyone like that. But what are you to do with present-day children, especially in a dissolute city like Warsaw? But young women, and women who have husbands and children, and no need, thank God, to please anyone, how are they not ashamed before God and other people and their own children, to come to a wedding half naked, like loose girls, in a public house? Jewish daughters, who ought not to be seen uncovered by the 4 walls of their room, to come like that to a wedding. To a Jewish wedding. Pfoo, pfoo, I'd like to spit at this newfangled world. May God not punish me for these words. It is enough to make one faint to see such a display among Jews. After the ceremony under the canopy, which was erected in the center of the room, the company sat down to the table, and Gittel was again seated at the top, between the 2 women before mentioned, whose perfumes went to her head. She felt so queer and so ill at ease that she could not partake of the dinner. Her mouth seemed locked, and the tears came in her eyes. When they rose from table, Gittel sought out a place removed from the upper end, and sat down in a window, but presently the bride's mother, also in décolleté, caught sight of her, and went and took her by the hand. "Why are you sitting here, Meschutzenst? Why are you not at the top?" "I wanted to rest myself a little." "Oh, no, no, come and sit there," said the lady, led her away by force, and seated her between the 2 ladies with the perfumes. Long did she sit, feeling more and more sick and dizzy. If only she could have poured out her heart to some one person, if she could have exchanged a single word with anybody during that whole evening, it would have been a relief. but there was no one to speak to. The music played, there was dancing, but Gittel could see nothing more. She felt an oppression at her heart, and became covered with perspiration, her head grew heavy, and she fell from her chair. The bridegroom's mother has fainted, was the outcry through the whole room. Water, water. They fetched water, discovered a doctor among the guests, and he led Gittel into another room, and soon brought her round. The bride, the bridegroom, the bride's mother, and the two ladies ran in. What can have caused it? Lie down. How do you feel now? Perhaps you would like a sip of lemonade? They all asked. Thank you, I want nothing, I feel better already, leave me alone for a while. I shall soon recover myself, and be all right. So Gittel was left alone, and she breathed more easily, her head stopped aching, she felt like one let out of prison, only there was a pain at her heart. The tears which had choked her all day now began to flow, and she wept abundantly. The music never ceased playing. She heard the sound of the dancers' feet and the directions of the master of ceremonies. The floor shook, Gittel wept, and tried with all her might to keep from sobbing, so that people should not hear and come in and disturb her. She had not wept so since the death of her husband, and this was the wedding of her favored son. By degrees she ceased to weep altogether, dried her eyes, and sat quietly talking to herself of the many things that passed through her head. Better that he, may he enter a lightsome paradise, should have died than lived to see what I have seen, and the dear delight which I have had, at the wedding of my youngest child. Better that I myself should not have lived to see his marriage canopy. Canopy, indeed. 4 sticks stuck up in the middle of the room to make fun with, for people to play at being married, like monkeys. Then a table, no 7 blessings, not a Jewish word, not a Jewish face, no minion to be seen, only shaven Gentiles upon Gentiles, a room full of naked women and girls that make you sick to look at them. Moishel had better have married a poor orphan, I shouldn't have been half so ashamed or half so unhappy. Gittel called to mind the sort of a bridegroom's mother she had been at the marriage of her eldest son, and the satisfaction she had felt. 400 women had accompanied her to the shul when Avremel was called to the reading of the law as a bridegroom, and they had scattered nuts, almonds, and raisins down upon him as he walked. Then the party before the wedding, and the ceremony of the canopy, and the procession with the bride and bridegroom to the shul, the merry homecoming, the golden soup. The bridegroom brought at supper time to the sound of music, the cantor and his choir, who sang while they sat at table, the 7 blessings, the vivat played for each one separately, the kosher dance, the dance round the bridegroom, and the whole time it had been Gittel here and Gittel there. Good luck to you, Gittel, may you be happy in the young couple and in all your other children, and live to dance at the wedding of your youngest. It was a delight and no mistake. Where is Gittel? She hears them cry. The uncle, the aunt, a cousin have paid for a dance for the meshutzenst on the bridegroom's side. Play, musicians all. The company make way for her, and she dances with the uncle, the aunt, and the cousin, and all the rest clap their hands. She is tired with dancing, but still they call Gittel. An old friend sings a merry song in her honor. Play, musicians all. And Gittel dances on, the company clap their hands, and wish her all that is good, and she is penetrated with genuine happiness and the joy of the occasion. Then, when the guests begin to depart, and the mothers of bridegroom and bride whisper together about the forthcoming veiling ceremony, she sees the bride in her wig, already a wife, her daughter-in-law. Her jam pancakes and almond rolls are praised by all, and what cakes are left over from the veiling ceremony are either snatched one by one, or else they are seized wholesale by the young people standing round the table, so that she should not see, and they laugh and tease her. That is the way to become a mother-in-law. And here, of course, the whole of the pancakes and sweet cakes and almond rolls which she brought have never so much as been unpacked, and are to be thrown away or taken home again, as you please. A shame. No one came to her for cakes. The wig, 2. May be thrown away or carried back. Moishel told her it was not required, it wouldn't quite do. The bride accepted the silver candlesticks with embarrassment, as though Gittel had done something to make her feel awkward, and some girls who were standing by smiled. Regina has been given candlesticks for the candle blessing on Fridays. Ha, ha, ha. The bridal couple with the girl's parents came in to ask how she felt, and interrupted the current of her thoughts. We shall drive home now, people are leaving, they said. The wedding is over, they told her, everything in life comes to a speedy end. Gittel remembered that when Avremel was married, the festivities had lasted a whole week, till over the second cheerful Sabbath, when the bride, the new daughter-in-law, was led to the shul. The day after the wedding Gittel drove home, sad, broken in spirit, as people return from the cemetery where they have buried a child, where they have laid a fragment of their own heart, of their own life, under the earth. Driving home in the carriage, she consoled herself with this at least. A good thing that Beil and Zlatk, Avremel and Yossel were not there. The shame will be less, there will be less talk, nobody will know what I am suffering. Gittel arrived the picture of gloom. When she left for the wedding, she had looked suddenly 20 years younger, and now she looked 20 years older than before. Poverty. I was living in Mezquez at the time, and Sain Will bookbinder lived there too. But heaven only knows where he is now. Even then his continual pallor augured no long residence in Mezquez, and he was a Yiddish lever Jew with a wife and 6 small children, and he lived by binding books. Who knows what has become of him? But that is not the question. I only want to prove that Sain Will was a great liar. If he is already in the other world, may he forgive me, and not be very angry with me, if he is still living in Mezquez. He was an orthodox and pious Jew, but when you gave him a book to bind, he never kept his word. When he took a book and even the whole of his pay in advance, he would swear by beard and earlocks, by wife and children, and by the Messiah, that he would bring it back to you by Sabbath, but you had to be at him for weeks before the work was finished and sent in. Once, on a certain Friday, I remembered that next day, Sabbath, I should have a few hours to myself for reading. A fortnight before I had given Sain Will a new book to bind for me. It was just a question whether or not he would return it in time, so I set out for his home, with the intention of bringing back the book, finished or not. I had paid him his 20 kopecks in advance, so what excuses could he possibly make? Once for all, I would give him a bit of my mind, and take away the work unfinished. It will be a lesson for him for the next time. Thus it was, walking along and deciding on what I should say to Sain Will, that I turned into the street to which I had been directed. Once in the said street, I had no need to ask questions, for I was at once shown a little, low house, roofed with moulded slate. I stooped a little by way of precaution, and entered Sain Will's house, which consisted of a large kitchen. Here he lived with his wife and children, and here he worked. In the great stove that took up 1/3 of the kitchen there was a cheerful crackling, as in every Jewish home on a Friday. In the forepart of the oven, on either hand, stood a variety of pots and pipkins, and gossiped together in their several tones. An elder child stood beside them holding a wooden spoon, with which she stirred or skimmed as the case required. Sain Will's wife, very much occupied, stood by the 1 4-post bed, which was spread with a clean white sheet, and on which she had laid out various kinds of cakes, of unbaked dough, in honor of Sabbath. Beside her stood a child, its little face red with crying, and hindered her in her work. Sain Will, take Chaxkel away. How can I get on with the cakes? Don't you know it's Friday? She kept calling out, and Sain Will, sitting at his work beside a large table covered with books, repeated every time like an echo, Chatzkel, let mother alone. And Chatzkel, for all the notice he took, might have been as deaf as the bedpost. The minute Sain Will saw me, he ran to meet me in a shamefaced way, like a sinner caught in the act, and before I was able to say a word, That is, tell him angrily and with decision that he must give me my book finished or not, never mind about the 20 kopecks, and so on, and thus revenge myself on him. He began to answer, and he showed me that my book was done. It was already in the press, and there only remained the lettering to be done on the back. Just a few minutes more, and he would bring it to my house. No, I will wait and take it myself, I said, rather vexed. Besides, I knew that to stamp a few letters on a book cover could not take more than a few minutes at most. Well, if you are so good as to wait, it will not take long. There is a fire in the oven. I have only just got to heat the screw. And so saying, he placed a chair for me, dusted it with a flap of his coat, and I sat down to wait. Sainwell really took my book out of the press quite finished except for the lettering on the cover, and began to hurry. Now he is by the oven, from the oven to the corner, and once more to the oven and back to the corner, and so on 10 times over, saying to me every time, "There, directly, directly, in another minute," and back once more across the room. So it went on for about 10 minutes, and I began to take quite an interest in this running of his from one place to another, with empty hands, and doing nothing but repeat directly, directly, this minute. Most of all I wonder why he keeps on looking into the corner. He never takes his eyes off that corner. What is he looking for? What does he expect to see there? I watch his face growing sadder. He must be suffering from something or other, and all the while he talks to himself, directly, directly, in one little minute. He turns to me. "I must ask you to wait a little longer. It will be very soon now, in another minute's time. Just because we want it so badly, you'd think she'd rather burst," he said, and he went back to the corner, stooped, and looked into it. "What are you looking for there every minute?" I asked him. "Nothing. But directly, take my advice. Why should you sit there waiting? I will bring the book to you myself. When one wants her to, she won't." "All right, it's Friday, so I need not hurry. Why should you have the trouble, as I am already here?" I reply, and ask him who is the she who won't. "You see, my wife, who is making cakes, is kept waiting by her too, and I, with the lettering to do on the book, I also wait." "But what are you waiting for?" "You see, if the cakes are to take on a nice glaze while baking, they must be brushed over with yolk." "Well, and what has it to do with stamping the letters on the cover of the book?" "What has it to do with it? Don't you know that the glaze gold which is used for the letters will not stick to the cover without some white of egg?" "Yes, I have seen them smearing the cover with white of egg before putting on the letters." "Then what?" "How what? That is why we are waiting for the egg." "So you have sent out to buy an egg?" "No, but it will be there directly." He points out to me the corner which he has been running to look into the whole time, and there, on the ground, I see an overturned sieve, and under the sieve, a hen turning round and cackling. "As if she'd rather burst," continued Sainwell. "Just because we want it so badly, she won't lay. She lays an egg for me nearly every time, and now, just as if she'd rather burst," he said, and began to scratch his head. "And the hen?" The hen went on turning round and round like a prisoner in a dungeon, and cackled louder than ever. To tell the truth, I had inferred at once that Sainwell was persuaded I should wait for my book till the hen had laid an egg, and as I watched Sainwell's wife, and saw with what anxiety she waited for the hen to lay, I knew that I was right, that Sainwell was indeed so persuaded, for his wife called to him. "Ask the young man for a kopeck and send the child to buy an egg in the market. The cakes are getting cold." The young man owes me nothing. A few weeks ago he paid me for the whole job. There is no one to borrow from. Nobody will lend me anything. I owe money all around. My very hair is not my own. When Sainwell had answered his wife, he took another peep into the corner, and said, "She will not keep us waiting much longer now. She can't cackle forever. Another 2 minutes." But the hen went on puffing out her feathers, becking and cackling for a good deal more than 2 minutes. It seemed as if she could not bear to see her master or mistress in trouble, as if she really wished to do them a kindness by laying an egg. But no egg appeared. I lent Saint Will 2 or 3 kopecks, which he was to pay me back in work, because Saint Will has never once asked for, or accepted, charity, and the child was sent to the market. A few minutes later, when the child had come back with an egg, Saint Will's wife had the glistening Sabbath cakes on a shovel, and was placing them gaily in the oven. My book was finished, and the unfortunate hen, released at last from her prison, the sieve, ceased to cackle and to ruffle out her plumage. Sholem Aleichem. Pen name of Shalom Rabinovitz, born, 1859, in Perez, Government of Poltava, Little Russia, Government Rabbi, at 21, in Lubny, near his native place, has spent the greater part of his life in Kyiv, in Odessa from 1890 to 1893, and in America from 1905 to 1907, Hebrew, Russian, and Yiddish poet, novelist, humorous short story writer, critic, and playwright, prolific contributor to Hebrew and Yiddish periodicals, founder of Die Judas Volksbibliothek, novels, Stempeniu, Yosel Solavai, etc., collected works, first series, Alwork, 4 vols, Krakow, 1903 to 1904, second series, New West's work, 8 vols, Warsaw, 1909 to 1911. The clock. The clock struck 13. Don't imagine I am joking, I am telling you, in all seriousness, what happened in Mazbevk, in our house, and I myself was there at the time. We had a clock, a large clock, fastened to the wall, an old clock inherited from my grandfather, which had been left him by my great-grandfather, and so forth. Too bad that a clock should not be alive and able to tell us something beside the time of day. What stories we might have heard as we sat with it in the room. Our clock was famous throughout the town as the best clock going, Reb Simcha's clock, and people used to come and set their watches by it, because it kept more accurate time than any other. You may believe me that even Reb Leibish, the sage, a philosopher, who understood the time of sunset from the sun itself, and knew the calendar by rote, he said himself, I heard him, that our clock was, well, as compared with his watch, it wasn't worth a pinch of snuff, but as there were such things as clocks, our clock was a clock. And if Reb Leibish himself said so, you may depend upon it he was right, because every Wednesday, between afternoon and evening prayer, Reb Leibish climbed busily onto the roof of the women's shul, or onto the top of the hill beside the old house of study, and looked out for the minute when the sun should set, in one hand his watch, and in the other the calendar. And when the sun dropped out of sight on the further side of Mazbevk, Reb Leibish said to himself, got him. And at once came away to compare his watch with the clock's. When he came in to us, he never gave us a good evening, only glanced up at the clock on the wall, then at his watch, then at the almanac, and was gone. But it happened one day that, when Reb Leibish came in to compare our clock with the almanac, he gave a shout. Simcha, make haste. Where are you? My father came running in terror. Ha, what has happened, Reb Leibish? Wretch, you dare to ask? And Reb Leibish held his watch under my father's nose, pointed at our clock, and shouted again, like a man with a trodden toe. Simcha, why don't you speak? It is a minute and a half ahead of the time. Throw it away. My father was vexed. What did Reb Leibish mean by telling him to throw away his clock? Who is to prove, said he, that my clock is a minute and a half fast? Perhaps it is the other way about, and your watch is a minute and a half slow? Who is to tell? Reb Leibish stared at him as though he had said that it was possible to have 3 days of new moon, or that the 17th of Tammuz might possibly fall on the eve of Passover, or made some other such wild remark, enough, if one really took it in, to give one an apoplectic fit. Reb Leibish said never a word. He gave a deep sigh, turned away without wishing us good evening, slammed the door, and was gone. But no one minded much, because the whole town knew Rebellibish for a person who was never satisfied with anything. He would tell you of the best cantor that he was a dummy, a log, of the cleverest man, that he was a lumbering animal, of the most appropriate match, that it was as crooked as an oven rake, and of the most apt simile, that it was as applicable as a pea to the wall. Such a man was Rebellibish. But let me return to our clock. I tell you, that was a clock. You could hear it strike 3 rooms away. Bum, bum, bum. Half the town went by it, to recite the midnight prayers, to get up early for silishes during the week before New Year and on the 10 solemn days, to bake the Sabbath loaves on Fridays, to bless the candles on Friday evening. They lighted the fire by it on Saturday evening, they salted the meat, and so all the other things pertaining to Judaism. In fact, our clock was the town clock. The poor thing served us faithfully, and never tried stopping even for a time. Never once in its life had it to be set to rights by a clockmaker. My father kept it in order himself. He had an inborn talent for clockwork. Every year on the eve of Passover, he deliberately took it down from the wall, dusted the wheels with a feather brush, removed from its inward part a collection of spider webs, desiccated flies, which the spiders had lured in to their destruction, and heaps of black cockroaches, which had gone in of themselves, and found a terrible end. Having cleaned and polished it, he hung it up again on the wall and shone, that is, they both shone. The clock shone because it was cleaned and polished, and my father shone because the clock shone. And it came to pass one day that something happened. It was on a fine, bright, cloudless day. We were all sitting at table, eating breakfast, and the clock struck. Now I always love to hear the clock strike and count the strokes out loud. 1, 2, 3, 7, 11, 12, 13. Oi, 13, 13, exclaimed my father, and laughed. You're a fine arithmetician, no evil eye. Whenever did you hear a clock strike 13? But I tell you, it struck 13. I shall give you 13 slaps, cried my father, angrily, and then you won't repeat this nonsense again. Goy, a clock cannot strike 13. Do you know what, Simshe, put in my mother, I am afraid the child is right. I fancy I counted the 13, too. There's another witness, said my father, but it appeared that he had begun to feel a little doubtful himself, for after the meal he went up to the clock, got upon a chair, gave a turn to a little wheel inside the clock, and it began to strike. We all counted the strokes, nodding our head at each one the while. 1, 2, 3, 7, 9, 12, 13. 13, exclaimed my father, looking at us in amaze. He gave the wheel another turn, and again the clock struck 13. My father got down off the chair with a sigh. He was as white as the wall, and remained standing in the middle of the room, stared at the ceiling, chewed his beard, and muttered to himself. Plague take 13. What can it mean? What does it portend? If it were out of order, it would have stopped. Then, what can it be? The inference can only be that some spring has gone wrong. Why worry whether it's a spring or not? Said my mother. You'd better take down the clock and put it to rights, as you've a turn that way. Hush, perhaps you're right, answered my father, took down the clock and busied himself with it. He perspired, spent a whole day over it, and hung it up again in its place. Thank God, the clock was going as it should, and when, near midnight, we all stood round it and counted 12, my father was overjoyed. Huh? It didn't strike 13 then, did it? When I say it is a spring, I know what I'm about. I always said you were a wonder, my mother told him. But there is one thing I don't understand. Why does it wheeze so? I don't think it used to wheeze like that. It's your fancy, said my father, and listened to the noise it made before striking, like an old man preparing to cough, chill 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 t-r-r-r-r. And only then, boom exclamation mark, boom exclamation mark, boom exclamation mark, and even the boom was not the same as formerly, for the former boom had been a cheerful one, and now they had crept into it a melancholy note, as into the voice of an old worn-out cantor at the close of the service for the Day of Atonement, and the hoarseness increased, and the strike became a lower and duller, and my father, worried and anxious. It was plain that the affair preyed upon his mind, that he suffered in secret, that it was undermining his health, and yet he could do nothing. We felt that any moment the clock might stop altogether. The imp started playing all kinds of nasty tricks and idle pranks, shook itself sideways, and stumbled like an old man who drags his feet after him. One could see that the clock was about to stop forever. It was a good thing my father understood in time that the clock was about to yield up its soul, and that the fault lay with the balance weights. The weight was too light. And he puts on a jostle, which has the weight of about 4 pounds. The clock goes on like a song, and my father becomes as cheerful as a newborn man. But this was not to be for long. The clock began to lose again. The imp was back at his tiresome performances. He moved slowly on one side, quickly on the other, with a hoarse noise, like a sick old man, so that it went to the heart. A pity to see how the clock agonized, and my father, as he watched it, seemed like a flickering, bickering flame of a candle, and nearly went out for grief. Like a good doctor, who was ready to sacrifice himself for the patient's sake, who puts forth all his energy, tries every remedy under the sun to save his patient, even so my father applied himself to save the old clock, if only it should be possible. The weight is too light, repeated my father, and hung something heavier on to it every time, first a frying pan, then a copper jug, afterwards a flat iron, a bag of sand, a couple of tiles, and the clock revived every time and went on, with difficulty and distress, but still it went, till one night there was a misfortune. It was on a Friday evening in winter. We had just eaten our Sabbath supper, the delicious peppered fish with horseradish, the hot soup with macaroni, the stewed plums, and said grace as was meet. The Sabbath candles flickered, the maid was just handing round fresh, hot, well-dried polished nuts from off the top of the stove, when in came Aunt Yancy, a dark-favoured little woman without teeth, whose husband had deserted her, to become a follower of the Rebbe, quite a number of years ago. Good Sabbath, said Aunt Yancy, I knew you had some fresh polished nuts. The pity is that I've nothing to crack them with. May my husband live no more years than I have teeth in my mouth. What did you think, Morke, of the fish today? What a struggle there was over them at the market. I asked him about his fish. Manasseh, the lazy, when up comes sore apparel, the rich, make haste, give it me, hand me over that little pike exclamation mark, why in such a hurry? Say I. God be with you, the river is not on fire, and Manasseh's not going to take the fish back there, either. Take my word for it, with these rich people money is cheap, and sense is dear. Turns round on me and says, paupers, she says, have no business here, a poor man, she says, shouldn't hanker after good things. What do you think of such a shrew? How long did she stand by her mother in the market selling ribbons? She behaves just like Bessel Pais Avroham's overward daughter, the one she married to a great man in Shktresh, who took her just as she was, without any dowry or anything, Jewish luck. They say she has a bad time of it, no evil eye to her days, can't get on with his children. Well, who would be a stepmother? Let them beware. Take Chavil. What is there to find fault within her? And you should see the life her stepchildren lead her. One hears shouting day and night, cursing, squabbling, and fighting. The candles began to die down, the shadow climbed the wall, scrambled higher and higher, the nuts crackled in our hands, there was talking and telling stories and tales, just for the pleasure of it, one without any reference to the other, but Aunt Yancy talked more than anyone. Hush! Cried out Aunt Yancy, listen, because not long ago a still better thing happened. Not far from Yampel, About 3 versts away, some robbers fell upon a Jewish tavern, killed a whole house full of people, down to a baby in a cradle. The only person left alive was a servant girl, who was sleeping on the kitchen stove. She heard people screeching, and jumped down, this servant girl, off the stove, peeped through a chink in the door, and saw, this servant girl I'm telling you of, saw the master of the house and the mistress lying on the floor, murdered, a pool of blood, and she went back, this girl, and sprang through a window, and ran into the town screaming, Jews, to the rescue, help, help, help. Suddenly, just as Aunt Yanti was shouting, help, 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 we heard Drwach Tarak bum, sin, 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 bomb. We were so deep in the story, we only thought at first that robbers had descended upon our house, and were firing guns, and we could not move for terror. For 1 minute we looked at one another, and then with one accord we began to call out, help, help, help. And my mother was so carried away that she clasped me in her arms and cried, my child, my life for yours, woe is me. Huh? What? What is the matter with him? What has happened? Exclaimed my father. Nothing. Nothing. Hush. Hush. Cried Aunt Jenty, gesticulating wildly, and the maid came running in from the kitchen, more dead than alive. Who screamed? What is it? Is there a fire? What is on fire? Where? Fire? Fire? Where is the fire? We all shrieked. Help! Help! Jewalt, Jews, to the rescue, fire, fire. Which fire? What fire? Where fire? Fire take you, you foolish girl, and make cinders of you. Scolded Aunt Yanti at the maid. Now she must come, as though we weren't enough before. Fire, indeed, says she. Into the earth, with you, to all black ears. Did you ever hear of such a thing? What are you all yelling for? Do you know what it was that frightened you? The best joke in the world, and there's nobody to laugh with. God be with you, it was the clock falling onto the floor, now you know. You hung every sort of thing onto it, and now it is fallen, weighing at least 3 pud. And no wonder. A man wouldn't have fared better. Did you ever? It was only then we came to our senses, rose one by one from the table, went to the clock, and saw it lying on its poor face, killed, broken, shattered, and smashed forevermore. There is an end to the clock, said my father, white as the wall. He hung his head, wrung his fingers, and the tears came into his eyes. I looked at my father and wanted to cry, too. But now, see, what is the use of fretting to death? Said my mother. No doubt it was so decreed and written down in heaven that today, at that particular minute, our clock was to find its end, just, I beg to distinguish, like a human being. May God not punish me for saying so. May it be an atonement for not remembering the Sabbath, for me, for thee, for our children, for all near and dear to us, and for all Israel. Amen. Salah. Fishel the teacher. Twice a year, as sure as the clock, on the first day of Nisan and the first of Elul, for Passover and Tabernacles, Fishel the teacher travelled from Borta to Chashkeshavet, home to his wife and children. It was decreed that nearly all his life long he should be the guest of his own family, a very welcome guest, but a passing one. He came with the festival, and no sooner was it over, than back with him to Borta, back to the schooling, the ruler, the Jewry, the dull, thick wits, to the being knocked about from pillar to post, to the wandering among strangers, and the longing for home. On the other hand, when Fishel does come home, he is an emperor. His wife Bathsheba comes out to meet him, pulls at her headkerchief, blushes red as fire, questions as though in asides, without as yet looking him in the face, "How are you?" And he replies, "How are you?" And Froyika's son, a boy of 13 or so, greets him, and the father asks, "Well, Ephraim, and how far on are you in the Jewry?" And his little daughter Risel, not at all a bad-looking little girl, with a plaited pigtail, hugs and kisses him. Tate, what sort of present have you brought me? Printed calico for a frock, and a silk kerchief for mother. There, give mother the kerchief. And Fischel takes a silk, suppose a half-silk, kerchief out of his tallis bag, and Bathsheba grows redder still, and pulls her headcloth over her eyes, takes up a bit of household work, busies herself all over the place, and ends by doing nothing. Bring the Jewry, Ephraim, and let me hear what you can do. And Feuilletonist recites his lesson like the bright boy he is, and Fischel listens and corrects, and his heart expands and overflows with delight, his soul rejoices, a bright boy, Feuilletonist, a treasure. If you want to go to the bath, there is a shirt ready for you. Thus Bathsheba as she passes him, still not venturing to look him in the face, and Fischel has a sensation of unspeakable comfort. He feels like a man escaped from prison and back in a lightsome world, among those who are near and dear to him. And he sees in fancy a very, very hot bath-house, and himself lying on the highest bench with other Jews, and he perspires and swishes himself with the birch twigs, and can never have enough. Home from the bath, fresh and lively as a fish, like one newborn, he rehearses the portion of the law for the festival, puts on the Sabbath cloak and the new girdle, steals a glance at Bathsheba in her new dress and silk kerchief, still a pretty woman, and so pious and good and goes with Feuilletonist to the shul. The air is full of Sholem Alechems. Welcome, Reb Fischel the teacher, and what are you about? A teacher teaches. What is the news? What should it be? The world is the world. What is going on in Balta? Balta is Balta. The same formula is repeated every time, every half year, and Nissel the reader begins to recite the evening prayers, and sends forth his voice, the further the louder, and when he comes to "And Moses declared the set feasts of the Lord unto the children of Israel," it reaches nearly to heaven. And Feuilletonist stands at his father's side, and recites the prayers melodiously, and once more Fischel's heart expands and flows over with joy. A good child, Feuilletonist, a good, pious child. A happy holiday, a happy holiday. A happy holiday, a happy year. At home they find the Passover table spread, the 4 cups, the bitter herbs, the almond and apple paste, and all the rest of it. The reclining seats, 2 small benches with big cushions, stand ready, and Fischel becomes a king. Fischel, robed in white, sits on the throne of his dominion. Bathsheba, the queen, sits beside him in her new silk kerchief. Ephraim, the prince, in a new cap, and the princess Risel with her plait, sit opposite them. Look on with respect. His Majesty Fischel is seated on his throne, and has assumed the sway of his kingdom. The Chashkchavate scamps, who love to make game of the whole world, not to mention a teacher, maintain that one Passover Eve Fischel sent his Bathsheba the following Russian telegram: Rybiata sobrad ing vezia prigotovin byidu sust vovets, which means, have entered my pupils for the next term, am bringing money, prepare the dumplings, I come to reign. The mischief makers declare that this telegram was seized at Balta station, that Bathsheba was sought and not found, and that Fischel was sent home with the edap. Dreadful. But I can assure you, there isn't a word of truth in the story, because Fischel never sent a telegram in his life. Nobody was ever seen looking for Bathsheba, and Fischel was never taken anywhere by the edap. That is, he was once taken somewhere by the edap, but not on account of a telegram, only on account of a simple passport. And not from Balta, but from Yehupetz, and not at Passover, but in summertime. He wished, you see, to go to Yehupetz in search of a post as teacher, and forgot his passport. He thought it was in Balta, and he got into a nice mess, and forbade his children and children's children never to go in search of pupils in Yehupetz. Since then he teaches in Balta, and comes home for Passover, winds up his work a fortnight earlier, and sometimes manages to hasten back in time for the great Sabbath. Hasten, did I say? That means when the road is a road, when you can hire a conveyance, and when the bug can either be crossed on the ice or in the ferryboat. But when, for instance, the snow has begun to melt, and the mud is deep, when there is no conveyance to be had, when the bug has begun to split the ice, and the ferryboat has not started running, when a skiff means peril of death, and the festival is upon you, what then? It is just nitgut. Fischl the teacher knows the taste of nitgut. He has had many adventures and mishaps since he became a teacher, and took to faring from Chashkchavate to Balta and from Balta to Chashkchavate. He has tried going more than half a way on foot, and helped to push the conveyance besides. He has lain in the mud with the priest on top, and he below. He has fled before a pack of wolves who were pursuing the vehicle, and afterwards they turned out to be dogs, and not wolves at all. But anything like the trouble on this Passover Eve had never befallen him before. The trouble came from the bug, that is, from the bugs breaking through the ice, and just having its fling when Fischl reached it in a hurry to get home, and really in a hurry, because it was already Friday and Passover Eve, that is, Passover Eve fell on a Sabbath that year. Fischl reached the bug in a Gentile conveyance Thursday evening. According to his own reckoning, he should have got there Tuesday morning, because he left Balta Sunday after market, the Spirit having moved him to go into the marketplace to spy after a chance conveyance. How much better it would have been to drive with Yankel Shegetz, a Balta carrier, even at the cart tail, with his legs dangling, and shaken to bits. He would have been home long ago by now, and have forgotten the discomforts of the journey. But he had wanted a cheaper transit, and it is an old saying that cheap things cost dear. Yone, the tippler, who procures vehicles in Balta, had said to him, "Take my advice, give 2 rubles, and you will ride in Yankel's wagon like a lord, even if you do have to sit behind the wagon. Consider, you're playing with fire, the festival approaches." But as ill luck would have it, there came along a familiar Gentile from Chashkchavate. Rabbi, you're not wanting a lift to Chashkchavate? How much would the fare be? He thought to ask how much, and he never thought to ask if it would take him home by Passover, because in a week he could have covered the distance walking behind the cart. But as Fischl drove out of the town, he soon began to repent of his choice, even though the wagon was large, and he sitting in it in solitary grandeur, like any count. He saw that with a horse that dragged itself along in that way, there would be no getting far, for they drove a whole day without getting anywhere in particular, and however much he worried the peasant to know if it were a long way yet, the only reply he got was, "Who can tell?" In the evening, with a rumble and a shout and a crack of the whip, there came up with them Yankel Shegetz and his 4 fiery horses jingling with bells, and the large coach packed with passengers before and behind. Yankel, catching sight of the teacher in the peasant's cart, gave another loud crack with his whip, ridiculed the peasant, his passenger, and his horse, as only Yankel Shegetz knows how, and when a little way off, he turned and pointed at one of the peasant's wheels. "Hello, man, look out. There's a wheel turning." The peasant stopped the horse, and he and the teacher clambered down together, and examined the wheels. They crawled underneath the cart, and found nothing wrong, nothing at all. When the peasant understood that Yankel had made a fool of him, he scratched the back of his neck below his collar, and began to abuse Yankel and all Jews with curses such as Fischl had never heard before. His voice and his anger rose together. "May you never know good. May you have a bad year. May you not see the end of it. Bad luck to you, you and your horses and your wife and your daughter and your aunts and your uncles and your parents-in-law and all your cursed Jews." It was a long time before the peasant took his seat again, nor did he cease to fume against Yankel the driver and all Jews, until, with God's help, they reached a village wherein to spend the night. Next morning Fischl rose with the dawn, recited his prayers, a portion of the law, and a few psalms, breakfasted on a roll, and was ready to set forward. Unfortunately, Chvidor, this was the name of his driver, was not ready. Chvidor had sat up late with a crony and got drunk, and he slept through a whole day and a bit of the night, and then only started on his way. Well, Fischl reproved him as they sat in the cart. "Well, Chvidor, a nice way to behave, upon my word. Do you suppose I engaged you for a merrymaking? What have you to say for yourself, I should like to know, eh?" And Fischl addressed other reproachful words to him, and never ceased casting the other's laziness between his teeth, partly in Polish, partly in Hebrew, and helping himself out with his hands. Chvidor understood quite well what Fischl meant, but he answered him not a word, not a syllable even. No doubt he felt that Fischl was in the right, and he was silent as a cat, till, on the fourth day, they met Yankel Shegetz, driving back from Chashkchavate with a rumble and a crack of his whip, who called out to them, "You may as well turn back to Balta, the bug has burst the ice." Fischl's heart was like to burst, too, but Chvidor, who thought that Yankel was trying to fool him a second time, started repeating his whole list of curses, called down all bad dreams on Yankel's hands and feet, and never shut his mouth till they came to the bug on Thursday evening. They drove straight to Prokop Baraniuk, the ferryman, to inquire when the ferryboat would begin to run, and the two Gentiles, Chvidor and Prokop, took to sipping brandy, while Fischl proceeded to recite the afternoon prayer. The sun was about to set, and poured a rosy light onto the high hills that stood on either side of the river, and were snow-covered in parts and already green in others, and intersected by rivulets that wound their way with murmuring noise down into the river, where the water foamed with the broken ice and the increasing thaw. The whole of Chashkchavate lay before him as on a plate, while the top of the monastery sparkled like a light in the setting sun. Standing to recite the 18 benedictions, with his face towards Chashkchavate, Fischl turned his eyes away and drove out the idle thoughts and images that had crept into his head. Bathsheba with the new silk kerchief, Froyikes with the Jewry, Riesel with her plait, the hot bath and the highest bench, and freshly baked matzahs, together with nice peppered fish and horseradish that goes up your nose, Passover borscht with more matzahs, a heavenly mixture, and all the other good things that desire is capable of conjuring up, and however often he drove these fancies away, they returned and crept back into his brain like summer flies, and disturbed him at his prayers. When Fischl had repeated the 18 benedictions and all knew, he betook him to Prokop, and entered into conversation with him about the ferryboat and the festival eve, giving him to understand, partly in Polish and partly in Hebrew and partly with his hands, what Passover meant to the Jews, and Passover Eve falling on a Sabbath, and that if, which heaven forbid, he had not crossed the bug by the time tomorrow, he was a lost man, for, beside the fact that they were on the lookout for him at home, his wife and children, Fischl gave a sigh that rent the heart. He would not be able to eat or drink for a week, and Fischl turned away, so that the tears in his eyes should not be seen. Prokop Baraniuk quite appreciated Fischl's position, and replied that he knew tomorrow was a Jewish festival, and even how it was called. He even knew that the Jews celebrated it by drinking wine and strong brandy. He even knew that there was yet another festival at which the Jews drank brandy, and a third when all Jews were obliged to get drunk, but he had forgotten its name. "Well and good," Fischl interrupted him in a lamentable voice, "but what is to happen? How if I don't get there?" To this Prokop made no reply. He merely pointed with his hand to the river, as much as to say, "See for yourself." And Fischl lifted up his eyes to the river, and saw that which he had never seen before, and heard that which he had never heard in his life. Because you may say that Fischl had never yet taken in anything out of doors, he had only perceived it accidentally, by the way, as he hurried from Cheddar to the house of study, and from the house of study to Cheddar. The beautiful blue bug between the two lines of imposing hills, the murmur of the winding rivulets as they poured down the hillsides, the roar of the ever-deepening spring flow, the light of the setting sun, the glittering cupola of the convent, the wholesome smell of Passover Eve tied out of doors, and, above all, the being so close to home and not able to get there, all these things lent wings, as it were, to Fischl's spirit, and he was born into a new world, the world of imagination, and crossing the bug seemed the merest trifle, if only the Almighty were willing to perform a fraction of a miracle on his behalf. Such and like thoughts floated in and out of Fischel's head, and lifted him into the air, and so far across the river, he never realized that it was night, and the stars came out, and a cool wind blew in under his cloak to his little prayer scarf, and Fischel was busy with things that he had never so much as dreamt of, earthly things and heavenly things, the great size of the beautiful world, the Almighty as creator of the earth, and so on. Fischel spent a bad night in Prokop's house, such a night as he hoped never to spend again. The next morning broke with a smile from the bright and cheerful sun. It was a singularly fine day, and so sweetly warm that all the snow left melted into kasha, and the kasha into water, and this water poured into the bug from all sides, and the bug became clearer, light blue, full and smooth, and the large bits of ice that looked like dreadful wild beasts, like white elephants hurrying and tearing along as if they were afraid of being late, grew rarer. Fischel the teacher recited the morning prayer, breakfasted on the last piece of leavened bread left in his prayer scarf bag, and went out to the river to see about the ferry. Imagine his feelings when he heard that the ferry boat would not begin running before Sunday afternoon. He clapped both hands to his head, gesticulated with every limb, and fell to abusing Prokop. Why had he given him hopes of the ferry boat's crossing next day? Whereupon Prokop answered quite coolly that he had said nothing about crossing with the ferry, he was talking of taking him across in a small boat, and that he could still do, if Fischel wished, in a sailboat, in a rowboat, in a raft, and the fare was not less than 1 ruble. A raft, a rowboat, anything you like, only don't let me spend the festival away from home. Thus Fischel, and he was prepared to give him 2 rubles then and there, to give his life for the holy festival, and he began to drive Prokop into getting out the raft at once, and taking him across in the direction of Chashkchavate, where Bathsheba, Froyik, and Riesel are already looking out for him. It may be they are standing on the opposite hills, that they see him, and make signs to him, waving their hands, that they call to him, only one can neither see them nor hear their voices, because the river is wide, dreadfully wide, wider than ever. The sun was already halfway up the deep, blue sky, when Prokop told Fischel to get into the little trough of a boat, and when Fischel heard him, he lost all power in his feet and hands, and was at a loss what to do, for never in his life had he been in a rowboat, never in his life had he been in any small boat, and it seemed to him the thing had only to dip a little to one side, and all would be over. "Jump in, and off we'll go," said Prokop once more, and with a turn of his oar he brought the boat still closer in, and took Fischel's bundle out of his hands. Fischel the teacher drew his coat skirts neatly together, and began to perform circles without moving from the spot, hesitating whether to jump or not. On the one hand were Passover Eve, Bathsheba, Froyik, Riesel, the bath, the home service, himself as king; on the other, peril of death, the destroying angel, suicide, because one dip and, goodbye, Fischel, peace be upon him. And Fischel remained circling there with his folded skirts, till Prokop lost patience and said, another minute, and he should set out and be off to Chashkchavate without him. At the beloved word Chashkchavate, Fischel called his dear ones to mind, summoned the whole of his courage, and fell into the boat. I say fell in, because the instant his foot touched the bottom of the boat, it slipped, and Fischel, thinking he was falling, drew back, and this drawing back sent him headlong forward into the boat bottom, where he lay stretched out for some minutes before recovering his wits, and for a long time after his face was livid, and his hands shook, while his heart beat like a clock, tick-tick-tack, tick-tick-tack. Prokop meantime sat in the prow as though he were at home. He spit into his hands, gave a stroke with the oar to the left, a stroke to the right, and the boat glided over the shining water, and Fischel's head spun round as he sat. As he sat? No, he hung floating, suspended in the air. One false movement, and that which held him would give way, One lean to the side, and he would be in the water and done with. At this thought, the words came into his mind, and they sank like lead in the mighty waters, and his hair stood on end at the idea of such a death. How? Not even to be buried with the dead of Israel? And he bethought himself to make a vow to do what? To give money in charity. He had none to give, he was a very, very poor man. So he vowed that if God would bring him home in safety, he would sit up whole nights and study, go through the whole of the Talmud in 1 year, God willing, with God's help. Fischel would dearly have liked to know if it were much further to the other side, and found himself seated, as though on purpose, with his face to Prokop and his back to Chashkchavate. And he dared not open his mouth to ask. It seemed to him that his very voice would cause the boat to rock, and one rock, goodbye, Fischel. But Prokop opened his mouth of his own accord, and began to speak. He said there was nothing worse when you were on the water than a thaw. It made it impossible, he said, to row straight ahead. One had to adapt one's course to the ice, to row round and backwards. There's a bit of ice making straight for us now. Thus Prokop, and he pulled back and let pass a regular ice floe, which swam by with a singular rocking motion and a sound that Fischel had never seen or heard before. And then he began to understand what a wild adventure this journey was, and he would have given goodness knows what to be safe on shore, even on the one they had left. "Oh, you see that?" asked Prokop, and pointed upstream. Fischel raised his eyes slowly, was afraid of moving much, and looked, and saw nothing but water, water, and water. "There's a big one coming down on us now, we must make a dash for it, for it's too late to row back." So said Prokop, and rowed away with both hands, and the boat glided and slid like a fish through the water, and Fischel felt cold in every limb. He would have liked to question, but was afraid of interfering. However, again Prokop spoke of himself. "If we don't twin by a minute, it will be the worse for us." Fischel can now no longer contain himself, and asks, "How do you mean, the worse? We shall be done for," says Prokop. "Done for? Done for? How do you mean, done for?" persists Fischel. "I mean, it will grind us." "Grind us? Grind us?" Fischel does not understand what grind us may signify, but it has a sound of finality, of the next world, about it, and Fischel is bathed in a cold sweat, and again the words come into his head, and they sank like lead in the mighty waters. And Prokop, as though to quiet our Fischel's mind, tells him a comforting story of how, years ago at this time, the bug broke through the ice, and the ferryboat could not be used, and there came to him another person to be rowed across, an excise official from a man, quite a person of distinction, and offered a large sum, and they had the bad luck to meet 2 huge pieces of ice, and he rowed to the right, in between the floes, intending to slip through upwards, and he made an involuntary side motion with the boat, and they went flop into the water. Fortunately, he, Prokop, could swim, but the official came to grief, and the fare money, too. "It was good-bye to my fare," ended Prokop, with a sigh, and Fischel shuddered, and his tongue dried up, so that he could neither speak nor utter the slightest sound. In the very middle of the river, just as they were rowing along quite smoothly, Prokop suddenly stopped, and looked up the stream. Then he laid down the oars, drew a bottle out of his pocket, tilted it into his mouth, sipped out of it 2 or 3 times, put it back, and explained to Fischel that he had always to take a few sips of the bitter drop, otherwise he felt bad when on the water. And he wiped his mouth, took the oars in hand again, and said, having crossed himself 3 times, "Now for a race." "A race? With whom? With what?" Fischel did not understand, and was afraid to ask, but again he felt the brush of the death angel's wing, for Prokop had gone down onto his knees, and was rowing with might and main. Moreover, he said to Fischel, and pointed to the bottom of the boat, "Rabbi, lie down." Fischel understood that he was to lie down, and did not need to be told twice. for now he had seen a whole host of floes coming down upon them, a world of ice, and he shut his eyes, flung himself face downwards in the boat, and lay trembling like a lamb, and recited in a low voice, "Hear, O Israel!" And the confession, thought on the graves of Israel, and fancied that now he lies in the abyss of the waters, now comes a fish and swallows him, like Jonah the prophet when he fled to Tarshish, and he remembers Jonah's prayer, and sings softly and with tears. Afofuni me iamad no fesh, the waters have reached unto my soul, Tahumye Zevin, the deep hath covered me. Fishel the teacher sang and wept and thought pitifully of his widowed wife and his orphaned children, and Prikop rode for all he was worth, and sang his little song. O thou maiden with the black lashes! And Prikop felt the same on the water as on dry land, and Fishel's Afofuni and Prikop's O maiden blended into one, and a strange song sounded over the bug, a kind of duet, which had never been heard there before. The black ear knows why he is so afraid of death, the Jew, so wondered Prikop Baraniuk, a poor tattered little Jew like him, a creature I would not give this old boat for, and so afraid of death. The shore reached, Prikop gave Fishel a shove in the side with his boot, and Fishel started. The Gentile burst out laughing, but Fishel did not hear. Fishel went on reciting the confession, saying Kaddish for his own soul, and mentally contemplating the graves of Israel. Get up, you silly Rebbe. Whither, in Chashkchavet? Slowly, Fishel raised his head, and gazed around him with red and swollen eyes. Chashkchavet? ? Chashkchavet. Give me the ruble, Rebbe. Fishel crawls out of the boat, and, finding himself really at home, does not know what to do for joy. Shall he run into the town? Shall he go dancing? Shall he first thank and praise God who has brought him safe out of such great peril? He pays the Gentile his fare, takes up his bundle under his arm and is about to run home, the quicker the better, but he pauses a moment first, and turns to Prikop the ferryman. Listen, Prikop, dear heart, tomorrow, please God, you'll come and drink a glass of brandy, and taste festival fish at Fishel the teacher's, for heaven's sake. Shall I say no? Am I such a fool? Replied Prikop, licking his lips in anticipation at the thought of the Passover brandy he would sip, and the festival fish he would delectate himself with on the morrow. And Prikop gets back into his boat, and pulls quietly home again, singing a little song, and pitying the poor Jew who was so afraid of death. The Jewish faith is the same as the Mohammedan, and it seems to him a very foolish one. And Fishel is thinking almost the same thing, and pities the Gentile on account of his religion. What knows he, yon poor Gentile, of such holy promises as were made to us Jews, the beloved people? And Fishel the teacher hastens uphill, through the Chashkchavet mud. He perspires with the exertion, and yet he does not feel the ground beneath his feet. He flies, he floats, he is going home to his dear ones, who are on the watch for him as for Messiah, who look for him to return in health, to seat himself upon his kingly throne and reign. Look, Jews, and turn respectfully aside. Fishel the teacher has come home to Chashkchavet, and seated himself upon the throne of his kingdom. An easy fast. That which Dr. Tanner failed to accomplish, was effectually carried out by Chaim Chaikin, a simple Jew in a small town in Poland. Dr. Tanner wished to show that a man can fast 40 days, and he only managed to get through 28, no more, and that with people pouring spoonfuls of water into his mouth, and giving him morsels of ice to swallow, and holding his pulse, a whole business. Chaim Chaikin has proved that one can fast more than 40 days, not, as a rule, 2 together, one after the other, but 40 days, if not more, in the course of a year. To fast is all he asks. Who said drops of water? Who said ice? Not for him. To fast means no food and no drink from one set time to the other, a real 24 hours. And no doctors sit beside him and hold his pulse, whispering, Hush! Be quiet. Well, let us hear the tale. Cheerful is a very poor man, encumbered with many children, and they, the children, support him. They are mostly girls, and they work in a factory and make cigarette wrappers, and they earn, some 1 gulden, others half a gulden, a day, and that not every day. How about Sabbaths and festivals and strict days? One should thank God for everything, even in their out-of-the-way little town strikes are all the fashion. And out of that they have to pay rent, for a damp corner in a basement. To buy clothes and shoes for the lot of them. They have a dress each, but they are 2 to every pair of shoes. And then food, such as it is. A bit of bread smeared with an onion, sometimes groats, occasionally there is a bit of turin that burns your heart out, so that after eating it for supper, you can drink a whole night. When it comes to eating, the bread has to be portioned out like cake. Oi, das Essen say eyes. Thus Cheerful's wife, a poor, sick creature, who coughs all night long. No evil eye, says the father, and he looks at his children devouring whole slices of bread, and would dearly like to take a mouthful himself, only, if he does so, the 2 little ones, Frank and Bielk, will go supperless. And he cuts his portion of bread in 2, and gives it to the little ones, Frank and Bielk. Frank and Bielk stretch out their little thin, black hands, look into their father's eyes, and don't believe him. Perhaps he is joking. Children are gnashers, they play with father's piece of bread, till at last they begin taking bites out of it. The mother sees and exclaims, coughing all the while, "It is nothing but eating and stuffing." The father cannot bear to hear it, and is about to answer her, but he keeps silent. He can't say anything, it is not for him to speak. Who is he in the house? A broken potsherd, the last and least, no good to anyone, no good to them, no good to himself. Because the fact is he does nothing, absolutely nothing, not because he won't do anything, or because it doesn't befit him, but because there is nothing to do, and there's an end of it. The whole townlet complains of there being nothing to do. It is just a crowd of Jews driven together. Delightful. They're packed like herrings in a barrel, they squeeze each other close, all for love. Well a day, thinks Chaikin, it's something to have children, other people haven't even that. But to depend on one's children is quite another thing and not a happy one. Not that they grudge him his keep, heaven forbid. But he cannot take it from them, he really cannot. He knows how hard they work, he knows how the strength is wrung out of them to the last drop, he knows it well. Every morsel of bread is a bit of their health and strength, he drinks his children's blood. No, the thought is too dreadful. Tatink, why don't you eat? Ask the children. Today is a fast day with me, answers Chaikin. Another fast? How many fasts have you? Not so many as there are days in the week. And Chaikin speaks the truth when he says that he has many fasts, and yet there are days on which he eats. But he likes the days on which he fasts better. First, they are pleasing to God, and it means a little bit more of the world to come, the interest grows, and the capital grows with it. Secondly, he thinks, no money is wasted on me. Of course, I am accountable to no one, and nobody ever questions me as to how I spend it, but what do I want money for, when I can get along without it, and what is the good of feeling one's self a little higher than a beast? A beast eats every day, but I can go without food for 1 or 2 days. A man should be above a beast. Oh, if a man could only raise himself to a level where he could live without eating at all. But there are one's confounded insides. So thinks Chaikin, for hunger has made a philosopher of him. The insides, the necessity of eating, these are the causes of the world's evil. The insides and the necessity of eating have made a pauper of me, and drive my children to toil in the sweat of their brow and risk their lives for a bit of bread. Suppose a man had no need to eat. my children would all stay at home. An end to toil, an end to moil, an end to streichen, an end to the risking of life, an end to factory and factory owners, to rich men and paupers, an end to jealousy and hatred and fighting and shedding of blood. All gone and done with. Gone and done with. A paradise. A paradise. So reasons Chaim Chaikin, and, lost in speculation, he pities the world, and is grieved to the heart to think that God should have made man so little above the beast. The day on which Chaim Chaikin fasts is, as I told you, his best day, and a real fast day, like the 9th of Ab, for instance, he is ashamed to confess it, is a festival for him. You see, it means not to eat, not to be a beast, not to be guilty of the children's blood, to earn the reward of a mitzvah, and to weep to heart's content on the ruins of the temple. For how can one weep when one is full? How can a full man grieve? Only he can grieve whose soul is faint within him. The good year knows how some folk answer it to their conscience, giving in to their insides, afraid of fasting. Buy them a groschen worth of oats, for charity's sake. Thus would Chaim Chaikin scorn those who bought themselves off the fast, and dropped a hard coin into the collecting box. The 9th of Ab is the hardest fast of all, so the world has it. Chaim Chaikin cannot see why. The day is long, is it? Then the night is all the shorter. It's hot out of doors, is it? Who asks you to go loitering about in the sun? Sit in the shul and recite the prayers, of which, thank God, there are plenty. I tell you, persists Chaim Chaikin, that the 9th of Ab is the easiest of the fasts, because it is the best, the very best. For instance, take the Day of Atonement fast. It is written, and you shall mortify your bodies. What for? To get a clean bill and a good year. It doesn't say that you are to fast on the 9th of Ab, but you fast of your own accord, because how could you eat on the day when the temple was wrecked, and Jews were killed, women ripped up, and children dashed to pieces? It doesn't say that you are to weep on the 9th of Ab, but you do weep. How could anyone restrain his tears when he thinks of what we lost that day? The pity is, there should be only one 9th of Ab, says Chaim Chaikin. Well, and the 17th of Tammuz, suggests someone. And there is only one 17th of Tammuz, answers Chaim Chaikin, with a sigh. Well, and the fast of Gedaliah, and the fast of Esther, continues the same person. Only one of each, and Chaim Chaikin sighs again. He circumflex, Reb Chaim, you are greedy for fasts, are you? More fasts, says Chaim Chaikin, and he takes upon himself to fast on the eve of the 9th of Ab as well, 2 days at a stretch. What do you think of fasting 2 days in succession? Isn't that a treat? It is hard enough to have to break one's fast after the 9th of Ab, without eating on the eve thereof as well. One forgets that one has insides, that such a thing exists as the necessity to eat, and one is free of the habit that drags one down to the level of the beast. The difficulty lies in the drinking. I mean, in the not drinking. If I, thinks Chaim Chaikin, allowed myself 1 glass of water a day, I could fast a whole week till Sabbath. You think I say that for fun? Not at all. Chaim Chaikin is a man of his word. When he says a thing, it's said and done. The whole week preceding the 9th of Ab he ate nothing, he lived on water. Who should notice? His wife, poor thing, is sick, the elder children are out all day in the factory, and the younger ones do not understand. Fradke and Bielk only know when they are hungry, and they are always hungry, the heart yearns within them, and they want to eat. Today you shall have an extra piece of bread, says the father, and cuts his own in 2, and Fradke and Bielk stretch out their dirty little hands for it, and are overjoyed. Tatink, you are not eating, remark the elder girls at supper, this is not a fast day. And no more do I fast, replies the father, and thinks, that was a take-in, but not a lie, because, After all, a glass of water, that is not eating and not fasting, either. When it comes to the eve of the 9th of Ab, Chaim feels so light and airy as he never felt before, not because it is time to prepare for the fast by taking a meal, not because he may eat. On the contrary, he feels that if he took anything solid into his mouth, it would not go down, but stick in his throat. That is, his heart is very sick, and his hands and feet shake, his body is attracted earthwards, his strength fails, he feels like fainting. But fie, what an idea! To fast a whole week, to arrive at the eve of the 9th of Ab, and not hold out to the end. Never! And Chaim takes his portion of bread and potato, calls Fradk and Bielk, and whispers, "Children, take this and eat it, but don't let mother see." And Fradk and Bielk take their father's share of food, and look wonderingly at his livid face and shaking hands. Chaim sees the children snatch at the bread and munch and swallow, and he shuts his eyes, and rises from his place. He cannot wait for the other girls to come home from the factory, but takes his book of lamentations, puts off his shoes, and drags himself, it is all he can do, to the shul. He is nearly the first to arrive. He secures a seat next the reader, on an overturned bench, lying with its feet in the air, and provides himself with a bit of burned-down candle, which he glues with its drippings to the foot of the bench, leans against the corner of the platform, opens his book, Lament for Zion and all the other towns, and he closes his eyes and sees Zion robed in black, with a black veil over her face, lamenting and weeping and wringing her hands, mourning for her children who fall daily, in foreign lands, for other men's sins. And wilt not thou, O Zion, ask of me some tidings of the children from thee reft? I bring thee greetings over land and sea, from those remaining, from the remnant left. And he opens his eyes and sees. A bright sunbeam has darted in through the dull, dusty window pane, a beam of the sun which is setting yonder behind the town. And though he shuts them again, he still sees the beam, and not only the beam, but the whole sun, the bright, beautiful sun, and no one can see it but him. Chaim looks at the sun and sees it, and that's all. How is it? It must be because he has done with the world and its necessities. He feels happy, he feels light, he can bear anything. He will have an easy fast, do you know? He will have an easy fast, an easy fast. Chaim shuts his eyes, and sees a strange world, a new world, such as he never saw before. Angels seem to hover before his eyes, and he looks at them, and recognizes his children in them, all his children, big and little, and he wants to say something to them, and cannot speak. He wants to explain to them that he cannot help it, it is not his fault. How should it, no evil eye, be his fault, that so many Jews are gathered together in one place and squeeze each other, all for love, squeeze each other to death for love? How can he help it, if people desire other people's sweat, other people's blood? If people have not learned to see that one should not drive a man as a horse is driven to work, that a horse is also to be pitied, one of God's creatures, a living thing? And Chaim keeps his eyes shut, and sees everything. And everything is bright and light, and curls like smoke, and he feels something is going out of him, from inside, from his heart, and is drawn upward and loses itself from the body, and he feels very light, very, very light, and he gives a sigh, a long, deep sigh, and feels still lighter, and after that he feels nothing at all, absolutely nothing at all. Yes, he has an easy fast. When Bear the beadle, a red-haired Jew with thick lips, came into the shul in his socks with the worn-down heels, and saw Chaim leaning with his head back, and his eyes open, he was angry, thought Chaim was dozing, and he began to grumble. He ought to be ashamed of himself, reclining like that, came here for a nap. Did he question Reb Chaim, excuse me, Reb Chaim? But Chaim did not hear him. The last rays of the sun streamed in through the shul window, right onto Chaim Chakin's quiet face with the black, shining, curly hair, the black, bushy brows, the half-open, black, kindly eyes, and lit the dead, pale, still, hungry face through and through. I told you how it would be. Chaim Chakin had an easy fast. The Passover guest. I have a Passover guest for you, Rebbione, such a guest as you never had since you became a householder. What sort is he? A real Oriental citron. What does it mean? It means a silken Jew, a personage of distinction. The only thing against him is, he doesn't speak